Far from the turmoil surrounding Seoul, the morning began in perfect calm. Sunlight filtered gently into a quiet restaurant where a steaming breakfast had just been served. For a fleeting moment, the world felt at peace. Then Jinwoo's phone began to ring. It didn't stop. The sharp vibration shattered the stillness. Jinwoo picked up immediately. On the other end was Woo Jinchul, head of the Korean Hunter Association, his voice strained with urgency. A monster had appeared in the heart of Seoul, and it was destroying everything in its path. Jinwoo frowned. That was impossible. The massive gate looming over the city wasn't due to break for several more days. But Jinchul insisted. This wasn't a dungeon break. A single creature had emerged and was wiping out entire forces. One guild had already been obliterated in an instant. This wasn't normal. Jinwoo's thoughts sharpened. He had left shadow soldiers stationed across Seoul, embedded with hunters to report even the slightest disturbance. Yet he had received nothing. No signal. No warning. He reached out to them. The connection was faint, distorted, as though something was deliberately suppressing it. Without hesitation, Jinwoo activated Shadow Exchange, attempting to swap places with the soldier stationed near Thomas Andre. A notification flashed before him. The designated shadow soldier could not be found. He tried again. The same result. A cold realization crept into his mind. An enemy powerful enough to erase his shadows, and Thomas Andre, a world-class hunter, was already facing it. Something was terribly wrong. Jinwoo asked one final question, his voice steady but edged with dread. Does the monster have a shadow? After checking a photograph, Jinchul gave his answer. No. That confirmed it. The creature had hidden itself from the gaze of the shadows. It existed beyond their sight. Elsewhere, Leonard watched as Thomas Andre advanced toward the devastation. His towering frame cast a long shadow across the ruined street, his presence alone commanding awe from the surrounding hunters. They recognized him instantly, a legend among legends. Thomas wasted no time. With calm authority, he ordered the nearby hunters to evacuate civilians immediately. His eyes then shifted toward the creature ahead. It resembled a man, but only vaguely. Its body was drenched in blood, its aura alien and suffocating. An otherworldly predator. Thomas's expression hardened as he stepped forward. Suddenly, the beast monarch, Rocken, moved. His claws sliced through the air in a lethal arc aimed directly at Thomas's chest. The impact rang out as steel-like talons scraped across flesh, but Thomas did not falter. He didn't even flinch. In the next instant, boom, Thomas's fist shot forward like a cannon. The punch connected with crushing force, snapping Rocken's head violently to the side. The shockwave tore through the beast monarch's body, rippling outward as the battlefield trembled from the impact. The true battle had begun. Thomas didn't hesitate. He drove forward with another earth-shattering punch, but a crooked smile tugged at Rocken's lips, as if he welcomed the violence. Thomas pressed on, swinging again. This time the beast monarch twisted aside at the last possible instant, the blow grazing past him. Undeterred, Thomas pivoted and unleashed yet another crushing strike, hammering Rocken straight into the ground. The earth split beneath the impact, asphalt fracturing as debris erupted outward in every direction. The battlefield itself seemed unable to withstand the force of their clash. As the two titans collided again and again, Choi Jong-in, guildmaster of the Hunters Guild, arrived at the scene. Stepping out of his car, flames flickered faintly at his fingertips as his sharp eyes surveyed the destruction. Evacuation efforts were already underway. Hunters from the Fiend Guild and the White Tiger Guild were clearing civilians from danger. But Jong-in's focus locked onto the fight. Something felt wrong. The creature's presence stirred a memory, an overwhelming pressure he hadn't felt since the Jeju Island raid. Even with Thomas Andre, one of the strongest hunters in the world, dominating the exchange, Jong-in couldn't shake the unease tightening in his chest. What exactly were they facing? Meanwhile, Thomas continued his relentless barrage. Each blow drove Rocken backward, forcing the beast monarch to yield ground step by step. Then, with a full-powered swing, Thomas delivered a devastating punch that sent Rocken hurtling across the asphalt. The road ripped apart beneath him as he skidded violently, finally crashing into a nearby building in a storm of shattered concrete. For a split second, silence. Then, metal fragments shot out from the dust cloud like bullets. Through the swirling debris, Rakan burst forth at blinding speed, charging straight at Thomas. In an instant, he slammed his head into Thomas's torso with brutal force. But Thomas did not budge. He planted his foot firmly into the fractured earth, absorbing the impact. In the same motion, he seized Rakan by the waist. With raw, monstrous strength, Thomas lifted the beast monarch high and executed a thunderous suplex, driving Rakan's head straight into the ground. The shockwave cracked the earth wide open, the impact echoing like an explosion. Yet Rakan was far from finished. In a flash, he retaliated, his leg snapping upward in a vicious kick that connected squarely with Thomas's face. The force launched Thomas skyward like a missile. Rakan landed lightly on his feet, dust settling around him as a savage grin spread across his blood-stained face. Thomas descended moments later, landing solidly on the broken pavement. His eyes never left his opponent. Rakan, the Goliath, activated his reinforcement skill. Power surged through his massive frame, muscles tightening, aura intensifying as the air around him trembled. The next round was about to begin. From a distance, Baek Yoon-ho, leader of the White Tiger Guild, watched the titanic confrontation unfold. His sharp gaze hardened as realization struck him. This was it. The subjugation site they had been preparing for had arrived far sooner, and far more violently, than anyone had expected. Rakan's body came crashing down near Baek Yoon-ho, the impact blasting apart the pavement and sending violent tremors through the ground. Baek's eyes widened. He had witnessed countless battles, but nothing like this. So that was the magical beast reported in the chaos. And the man fighting it so overwhelmingly could only be Thomas Andre, the Goliath. A mix of awe and fear gripped Baek as he shouted encouragement toward the towering hunter. But Thomas didn't even glance back. His voice thundered across the battlefield, sharp and commanding. Take cover. All of you. The warning was absolute. Rakan rose slowly, jaws parted, murderous intent pouring from him like a tangible mist. His presence alone suffocated the air. Hunters nearby felt their legs weaken under the crushing weight of his magic power. Baek's instincts screamed. This wasn't an ordinary monster. This wasn't even comparable to past calamities. The primal beast within him, his sharpened sixth sense, recognized it immediately. This was a predator, and he was prey. As that realization settled in, Rakan vanished. In the next instant, the beast monarch stood directly before Baek. Baek froze. His heart hammered violently in his chest, but he couldn't lift his gaze. The sheer pressure radiating from Rakan's body was overwhelming, far beyond anything Baek had experienced in the last decade. Rakan walked past him. That alone made Baek tremble. He had been spared, not out of mercy, but because he wasn't worth the effort. Then Rakan extended his claws. The air distorted. With a mysterious ability, gravity itself seemed to collapse inward. Cars tore free from the pavement. Lampposts bent and ripped from their foundations. Fire hydrants, benches, chunks of asphalt, all of it rose into the air, suspended by an invisible force. And then, they launched. Metal and debris shot forward like a storm of missiles, shredding through dust and concrete alike. Yet within the chaos, Thomas Andre stood firm. As vehicles hurtled toward him, he kicked them aside effortlessly, his focus never wavering. His massive frame cut through the flying wreckage like an immovable fortress. Then Thomas activated his own ability, gravitation. The air trembled violently as his power surged outward. The invisible force clashed against Rakan's control, overpowering it, and in a split second, the beast monarch was dragged straight toward him. Rakan's snarling face closed the distance instantly. Thomas didn't hesitate. Demolish. His ultimate technique ignited. Muscles swelled grotesquely, veins bulging across his arms as raw power condensed into both fists. The very ground beneath him cracked from the pressure. With a roar, Thomas raised his fists high and brought them down. The blow was catastrophic. A thunderous shockwave erupted outward, flattening everything in its path. The force drove Rakan deep into the earth, carving a crater into the battlefield as if struck by a falling meteor. For a moment, the world itself seemed to shake from the collision of their power. Thomas gave him no room to recover. He hurled himself into the crater and began raining down blows, each punch fueled by the full force of his skill. Heavy strikes crashed into Rakan's body with sickening thuds. His fists fell like war hammers, the shockwaves stacking atop one another as the ground split further beneath them. Again, and again, and again. From a distance, it looked like total domination. But something was wrong. A thin line of sweat rolled down Thomas Andre's temple. His massive frame trembled, not from fatigue, but from a feeling he couldn't explain. An instinct. A warning buried deep in his gut. He was landing every strike. Rockin wasn't resisting. Yet the unease only grew stronger. Then Thomas saw it. Rockin's eyes. Cold. Still. Unchanged. There was no desperation in them. No pain. No fear. Only a calm, disturbing patience. Rage surged through Thomas. With a roar, he raised both fists high into the air, preparing to end it in a single crushing blow. He brought them down with everything he had. And stopped. Rockin had caught the strike. With one hand. The impact that should have obliterated him barely made him flinch. Thomas's fists were locked in place, gripped effortlessly by the beast monarch's palm. For the first time, disbelief flickered across the Goliath's face. Then it began. Rockin's transformation. His black hair bleached into a savage white, growing longer and wilder as it whipped around him. His frame expanded, muscles tightening beneath skin that split into coarse white fur. Nails elongated into lethal claws. Teeth sharpened into predatory fangs. The air itself seemed to recoil. Thomas, still frozen in shock, stared at the creature before him. This wasn't the same opponent. This was something far worse. Without warning, Rockin moved. His claws blurred through the air, carving into Thomas with merciless speed. Flesh tore. Blood sprayed. The force of the strikes drove the massive hunter backward. A roar of pain thundered across the battlefield. For the first time, one of the world's strongest hunters cried out. Thomas tried to guard, tried to counter, but the assault was overwhelming. Each slash came faster than the last, shredding through defense and pride alike. Rockin raised his claw again, and paused. Something had entered his senses. From the swirling dust and fractured shadows, a familiar presence moved silently across the battlefield. A shadow ant. It crept forward through the chaos, unnoticed by the others, but not by a monarch. Rockin's head snapped toward it instantly. In a single motion, he seized the creature by the neck and lifted it effortlessly into the air, its limbs twitching helplessly in his grip. His feral grin widened. The battlefield had just grown far more interesting. Rockin studied the shadow ant in his grasp, golden eyes narrowing with faint curiosity. The creature struggled soundlessly, its body flickering like unstable smoke. The beast monarch tightened his grip. The ant shattered, its shadowy form dispersing into nothing. Rockin dismissed it as insignificant and turned back to his true prey. Thomas Andre was on one knee now, chest heaving, blood running down his battered frame. Still, he refused to fall completely. Rockin closed the distance in a blur and seized Thomas by the throat, lifting him slightly as his lips curled into a cruel smile. His voice dripped with mockery as he invited the Goliath to test his strength, if he still had any left. But Thomas Andre did not yield. With a surge of stubborn defiance, he twisted his body and slipped behind the beast monarch, locking one massive arm around Rockin's neck. Veins bulged as he tightened the hold, pouring every ounce of strength into the choke. His mind screamed one command. End this. For a moment, it seemed possible. Then Rockin's eyes turned cold. The beast monarch flexed. A sickening crack echoed through the battlefield. Thomas didn't register it at first, adrenaline still numbing his senses. But a split second later, agony erupted through him like fire. Rockin had shattered the arm wrapped around his neck. A raw, involuntary scream tore from Thomas's throat as his strength failed him. The grip loosened instantly. Rockin grabbed him by the head. The Goliath, once an immovable force, was lifted like a rag doll and driven violently into the ground. The impact shook the earth, carving deeper fractures into the already ruined battlefield. Before Thomas could recover, Rockin leaped onto him, pinning him down. One clawed hand clamped around his skull, iron tight. A twisted grin spread across the monarch's face as he spoke, voice low and predatory, hinting at hunger, at consumption. Thomas Andre, the towering symbol of human strength, lay broken beneath him. Rockin raised his claw to finish it. And then, a surge of magical energy split the air. A concentrated blast struck the beast monarch square in the face, detonating on impact. The force was powerful enough to tear him off Thomas and send him skidding backward across the fractured pavement. Dust and debris swirled again. The battle was not over. The blast that tore Rocken away from Thomas had come from afar. It was Leonard. The German hunter lowered his hand slowly, eyes burning with determination as he stepped forward. Though his heart pounded violently against his ribs, he forced his feet to move. He positioned himself beside the fallen Thomas Andre, placing his body between the beast Monarch and the wounded Goliath. Every instinct screamed at him to run. The pressure in the air was suffocating. His skin prickled. A cold sweat gathered along his spine. But he did not move. He couldn't allow the creature to slaughter Thomas, not while he still stood. Thomas, barely conscious, recognized the silhouette standing over him. "Run," he rasped, his voice broken and weak. "You'll die." The warning carried no pride, only truth. Leonard trembled, yet he shook his head, even knowing the gap in power, even knowing death was almost certain. In his heart, he had already chosen. A meaningless survival was worse than a proud end. If this was the final moment of his life, he would face it standing. He repeated those thoughts in his mind, over and over, trying to drown out the fear clawing at him. Then Rocken stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. His jaws spread wide, rows of fangs glinting as murderous intent flooded the battlefield once more. The closer he came, the more Leonard's resolve began to fracture. The weight of death became real, oppressively real. His breathing faltered. His vision trembled. For the first time, doubt struck him. Was this truly courage, or simply suicide? Rocken lunged. Leonard froze. His body refused to obey. The beast Monarch's jaws opened, ready to tear him apart. And a violent gust of wind tore across the battlefield. A thunderous impact exploded just ahead of Leonard. His eyes snapped open in shock. Rocken, who had been mere seconds from ending him, was suddenly blasted away, hurled dozens of meters through the air as if struck by a charging mountain. The massive body tumbled across the shattered ground. A colossal shadow descended from above. Kaisel, the shadow dragon, had entered the fray. With overwhelming force, Kaisel's enormous jaws had clamped onto Rocken and dragged him clear from Leonard's position, tearing the beast monarch away from his prey. Leonard stood frozen, disbelief flooding his features. Relief followed. He watched as Rocken struggled briefly in midair, suspended within the dragon's crushing grip. But then, Kaisel's shadowy form began to flicker. The great dragon dissolved into black mist, its presence fading as swiftly as it had appeared. The air stilled once more. Rocken landed lightly upon the fractured earth, and he was smiling. Rocken's golden eyes tracked the dispersing shadows, instinct sharpening. Something was descending. The air split. From above, Sung Jinwoo dropped like a falling blade, silent, precise, unstoppable. His body twisted midair with flawless control, and in one fluid motion, he delivered a crushing leg kick straight down onto Rocken's head. The impact detonated. The beast monarch was driven into the pavement as the ground caved beneath him. Asphalt shattered outward in a violent web of cracks. Nearby cars were shoved aside as though caught in a shockwave, and streetlights bent under the pressure. Jinwoo landed lightly beside Leonard, coat fluttering as the dust swirled around him. Calm, composed, as if he had merely stepped into place. Leonard stared at him, stunned, his mind struggling to process the sudden reversal. Seconds ago, he had been staring death in the face. Now the battlefield belonged to someone else. Without raising his voice, Jinwoo spoke. "Help him." He gestured toward Thomas Andre. Leonard snapped back to reality and quickly moved to support the wounded Goliath. Together, they lifted him carefully, retreating from the epicenter of destruction as fast as they could. Jinwoo did not look back. His gaze remained fixed ahead. Rocken, the beast monarch, began to rise from the debris, chunks of broken asphalt sliding from his shoulders. Killing intent rolled off him in suffocating waves. But Jinwoo felt something else too. Not just Rocken. Another presence lingered at the edge of his perception. His eyes darkened. The rubble shifted, and Rocken finally stood fully revealed once more. Despite the brutal strike he had taken, his posture remained steady. He rolled something in his mouth, then spat. Fragments of broken teeth scattered across the ground. A sneer twisted his face as his gaze locked onto Jinwoo. This time, there was no dismissal in his eyes. No amusement. Only recognition. Rockin's voice echoed low and hostile as realization dawned upon him. He could feel it clearly now, the power coiled within the human before him. The Shadow Monarch. The presence was unmistakable. Rockin's expression hardened with fury. To him, Jinwoo was no longer a mere hunter. He was an anomaly, a human who had seized the power of a superior being. And that made him far more dangerous than any prey. The battlefield grew still. Two monarchs now stood face to face. Jinwoo and Rockin stood locked in silence, killing intent colliding invisibly between them. Then, a new voice cut through the air. Cold, detached, malicious. The temperature dropped as the Frost Monarch materialized beside Rockin, his pale gaze fixed on Jinwoo. With quiet certainty, he confirmed what Rockin had sensed. The Shadow Monarch's power within Jinwoo was no coincidence. It had been arranged, part of a pact with an administrator. This outcome had been planned. The revelation only thickened the tension in the air. Before Jinwoo could respond, the ground beneath the city trembled. From the sewer grates and fractured asphalt, a tide of insects began pouring out. The sound came first, a suffocating buzz of thousands upon thousands of wings. They swarmed together in a writhing mass, rising and condensing into a single towering figure. The Queen of Insects, the Plague Monarch. Her many eyes gleamed with twisted curiosity as they locked onto Jinwoo. Excitement laced her voice as she wondered aloud what it might feel like to devour another monarch. Now there were three: the Beast Monarch, the Frost Monarch, the Plague Monarch. System notifications flickered before Jinwoo's eyes in rapid succession. Each monarch has designated you as their enemy. The black heart within his chest reacted violently, pounding with thunderous force. Power surged through his veins, awakening every nerve in his body. His entire being thrummed with life, with battle. Despite the odds, Jinwoo smiled. It was small, cold. With a single command, he summoned them. Arise. Shadows exploded outward across the battlefield. From beneath broken asphalt, from beneath wrecked vehicles, from every darkened corner, his army rose. An ocean of black steel and crimson eyes surrounded him. The Frost Monarch remained calm as Igris, the loyal Crimson Knight, charged straight toward him. At his side, iron thundered forward, both shadows moving in perfect coordination for a joint strike. Elsewhere, Tank and Jima roared as they hurled themselves at Rockin, claws and fangs bared. The ant soldiers advanced in disciplined waves toward the Plague Monarch, their unified movement shaking the air. Rockin let out a low growl of amusement at the sight of the vast shadow army. Surprise flickered briefly across his savage expression, tinged with curiosity. But the Frost Monarch did not react. He stepped forward slowly, almost elegantly. Then he inhaled. The air crystallized in his lungs. And when he exhaled, a blizzard was born. A bone-chilling wind swept across the battlefield, howling like the breath of death itself. Frost spread instantly in its wake. Asphalt froze solid. Vehicles became encased in ice. Shadows slowed as layers of crystal formed over their limbs. Everything the wind touched froze. The battlefield transformed into a frozen graveyard in seconds. The street that moments ago roared with the march of shadows had become a frozen graveyard. Ice stretched in every direction. Cars locked in crystal, buildings rimed with frost. Jinwoo's entire shadow army sealed mid-charge inside translucent prisons. Crimson eyes flickered faintly beneath layers of ice, but none could move. The storm reached Jinwoo last. The Frost Monarch's breath tore toward him like a living blizzard. The cold wasn't natural. It gnawed, invaded, sought to devour. With lightning reflexes, Jinwoo raised his daggers, Kamish's wrath blazing darkly in his grip, and crossed them before him. Steel met frost. The impact screamed. Ice exploded outward as he carved through the incoming wave, boots grinding against the frozen asphalt. The cold bit at his skin, trying to force him backward, but he held firm, refusing to yield a single step. Across the battlefield, the Frost Monarch watched calmly. Small fries, he said, voice echoing through the crystalline wasteland. To him, the immobilized shadows were insignificant, frozen statues incapable of even twitching within his domain. His gaze was filled with disdain as he mocked Jinwoo's attempt to oppose the monarchs with such toys. Beside him, Quaratia, the Plague Monarch, tilted her head slightly, observing the trapped ant soldiers with unsettling fondness. She spoke almost gently, lamenting the sight of her insect children caught in the frost. It was not grief. It was curiosity. The Frost Monarch ignored her sentiment and continued, his voice sharpened with ridicule. A mere human daring to believe he had inherited the Shadow Monarch's full power? Absurd. Even if the Shadow Monarch had once been the greatest among them, that did not mean this vessel could stand equal to true monarchs. The frozen air trembled with their arrogance. But Jinwoo's anger did not cool. If anything, it burned hotter. His eyes locked onto the Frost Monarch. The others faded from his focus. He tightened his grip on Kamish's wrath and lifted the blade, pointing it directly at the Monarch of Ice. "I'll kill you," he said. His voice was low, absolute. The Frost Monarch's expression darkened. His shoulder, the wound Jinwoo had inflicted earlier, throbbed beneath the ice. Rage flickered in his pale eyes. With a sharp motion of his hands, the frozen ground responded. Ice cracked. From beneath the battlefield, colossal figures began to rise. Golems forged of ice and stone, towering giants with jagged limbs and hollow, glowing eyes. Each step they took shook the frozen street. At the same time, Horatio whistled. The sound was shrill, inhuman. Across the battlefield, corpses began to move. Lifeless bodies twitched violently. Bones cracked and rearranged with grotesque snaps. Flesh tore and reshaped itself. Limbs split and multiplied. Within seconds, the dead had become monstrous, four-legged abominations, human spider hybrids that skittered across the ice with horrifying speed. They surged toward Jinwoo in a writhing wave. But his reaction was faster. Before the first creature could reach him, his figure blurred. A flash of black. Steel sang through frozen air. The nearest spider abomination was cleaved in two mid-leap, its shattered form dissolving into shadowed fragments before it even touched the ground. Jinwoo moved again, vanishing, reappearing, carving through the swarm in fluid arcs of lethal precision. The battlefield, once frozen in stillness, was alive again. And at its center stood a single human, facing three monarchs without retreat. Time slowed. Jinwoo's twin daggers, Kamish's wrath, whispered through the frozen air with flawless precision. Each spider abomination that lunged toward him was split cleanly in half before it could even register the strike. Bodies fell in neat, bisected halves, dissolving across the ice. A massive ice golem loomed over him, its colossal foot rising to crush him into the frozen street. Too slow. Jinwoo vanished. In less than a heartbeat, he reappeared atop the giant's back. One clean horizontal slash. The golem's head separated perfectly down the middle. The towering body collapsed in a thunderous crash, shattering into jagged shards that scattered across the battlefield. Two more golems lunged simultaneously, claws sweeping inward to tear him apart. Jinwoo had already moved. A blur. A piercing dash. He drove straight through both constructs with explosive force. Cracks spiderwebbed across their bodies before they detonated into countless fragments of ice and stone. Without pause, Jinwoo activated Ruler's authority. The invisible force seized him and launched him forward like a fired bullet, rocketing straight toward the Frost Monarch. The sudden acceleration caught the Monarch off guard. Jinwoo appeared before him in an instant, daggers poised for a killing strike. Steel descended and was intercepted. A powerful wrist blocked the blade at the final moment. It was the Beast Monarch. Rockin stood between them, confidence gleaming in his savage eyes, certain that no mere weapon could pierce his flesh. He was wrong. Kamish's wrath sliced cleanly through his wrist. The severed hand spun through the air, spraying dark fluid across the frozen street. Rockin roared in disbelief, staring at the stump where his hand had been. This was no ordinary blade. Before Rockin could react further, Jinwoo sensed another surge of killing intent. He looked up. The Plague Monarch's fist, infused with violent magical power, crashed toward him. Jinwoo twisted aside at the last possible instant. Her punch struck the ground instead. The shockwave obliterated the remaining spider abominations nearby, erasing them in a violent burst of force. Horatio straightened, a menacing aura coiling around her as she prepared to strike again. Behind them, Rockin calmly lifted his severed wrist. Tendons writhed, bone reformed, flesh fused seamlessly back together. Within seconds, his arm was whole again. Jinwoo exhaled slowly. So it would be that kind of battle. Around him, chaos intensified. The Frost Monarch's remaining golems advanced in heavy strides. Newly twisted corpses scuttled across the ice under the Plague Monarch's command. Rocken flexed his regenerated hand, baring his fangs as he moved forward once more. 3 monarchs. An army of constructs and abominations, all converging at once. Then, crack. Ice shattered behind Jinwoo. A violent surge of power erupted outward. My king, Baru, burst free from his frozen prison, shards exploding around him. His wings roared as he entered an emergency state, every instinct consumed by one purpose: protect the king. He launched into the sky at blinding speed, streaking toward Jinwoo so fast that even the monarchs were momentarily stunned. His piercing cry tore through the streets of Seoul, shaking the frozen wasteland itself. The Frost Monarch's eyes widened in disbelief. A shadow soldier had broken his binding spell. And not just any soldier. A commander-level entity. The Beast Monarch narrowed his eyes, recognizing the magnitude of Baru's presence. He understood what stood before them. A being forged for destruction. To see such a creature kneeling to a human was deeply unsettling. Only the Plague Monarch remained unfazed. She regarded Baru with cold disdain. A rebellious child, she murmured. Stretching out her hand, she unleashed a binding force, attempting to seize him mid-flight and crush him like an insect. But Baru did not hesitate. With savage determination and impossible speed, he darted straight toward her outstretched hand, his claws poised, his aura blazing with unyielding loyalty. The collision was inevitable. Baru moved on instinct. With a deafening screech, he tore straight through the Plague Monarch's outstretched hand. Chitin and flesh split apart under his claws, shredded as though made of paper. The force of the strike sent fragments scattering across the frozen battlefield. For a brief second, even the monarchs were stunned. Baru wasted no time. He pivoted midair and returned to Jinwoo's side, landing smoothly before dropping to one knee. My king. His voice carried fierce admiration, pride blazing in his crimson eyes. To Baru, Jinwoo's strength was absolute, divine even. But Jinwoo barely acknowledged it. The corpses around them were already moving again. Twisted bodies skittered across the ice, racing forward with unnatural speed. Baru shifted instantly, claws flashing as he ripped through the incoming abominations, tearing them apart before they could close the distance. Then, a shadow fell. Jinwoo turned just as a massive palm descended. The Plague Monarch had struck. The blow hit like a collapsing mountain. Jinwoo was swatted aside and hurled into the side of a nearby building. Concrete exploded on impact, the entire structure trembling as cracks raced along its walls. The shockwave rippled outward, rattling the frozen cityscape. Jinwoo pushed himself from the rubble. Pain radiated through his body. His breath came heavy. The world spun briefly, ears ringing, vision blurring. But there was no time to recover. He looked up. The sky was filled with death. Thousands of ice arrows hovered overhead, perfectly aligned and aimed directly at him. The Frost Monarch's handiwork. They fell. Jinwoo moved. His body blurred through the hailstorm, daggers flashing as he deflected, split, and evaded the incoming barrage. To onlookers, he seemed to vanish and reappear between impacts, his movements too fast for the eye to track. The Frost Monarch watched with narrowed eyes, impressed despite himself. How long? He taunted coldly. Can a human withstand this? He never finished the thought. A sudden, sharp pain pierced his chest. His breath hitched. Looking down, he saw it. A dagger buried deep within his body. Shock flooded his pale face. Jinwoo stood before him, silent, unwavering. I told you, Jinwoo said calmly. You won't leave this battlefield alive. Fury ignited in the Frost Monarch's veins. How could a mere human wound a monarch? The dagger vanished in a swirl of shadow and returned to Jinwoo's hand, recalled instantly after piercing the monarch's heart. The wound bled, but it was not fatal. Not to beings like them. Jinwoo already knew that. He spun Kamish Wrath into a reverse grip and launched forward without hesitation. A storm of steel erupted. His blades carved through the air in rapid succession, leaving streaks of darkness and slicing arcs of pressure that forced the Frost Monarch backward. Ice barriers rose and shattered. Frost-coated defenses cracked under the relentless assault. The clash rang across the battlefield, metal against magic, shadow against winter. Jinwoo's speed defied expectation. But he was not alone. Behind him, Baru's wings thundered once more as the commander surged forward, aura blazing, ready to strike alongside his king. And elsewhere, shadows within the frozen prison began to tremble. The battle was shifting. Behind him, Rakan, the beast monarch, matched Jinwoo step for step, silent and predatory. In one fluid motion, he summoned his weapon and waited for the perfect opening. When it came, he struck without mercy. The blade tore across Jinwoo's back, the force of the blow driving him forward. Blood spilled from Jinwoo's lips as he staggered, nearly collapsing under the sheer power of the attack. From afar, Baru witnessed it all in horror. His king had been wounded, and he could do nothing. The plague monarch, Quresha, held him firmly beneath her foot, her crushing weight pinning him to the frozen ground. No matter how fiercely he struggled, he could not break free. With chilling pride, Quresha introduced herself as the queen of insects, the mother of every crawling creature in existence. Even as Baru glared at her in fury, she dismissed his defiance. To her, he was still one of her children. Baru roared in frustration, but rage alone could not free him. He was forced to watch as Jinwoo struggled to rise. Rakan lifted his weapon once more, intent on ending the battle. Jinwoo was on one knee, steadying himself after the devastating strike. The beast monarch prepared to deliver the final blow. Then Baru's desperation turned into a thunderous cry. Calling out to the other shadow soldiers, he summoned them to defend their lord. The frozen battlefield trembled. Ice cracked and splintered, and from beneath it, a pair of glowing red eyes ignited in the darkness. Greed emerged first. With a violent surge of power, he shattered the ice that bound him and stepped forward, his massive frame radiating menace. He was no ordinary shadow. Once a warrior of immense strength, he now stood ready to annihilate anything that threatened his king. Rakan paused, assessing the new threat. He recognized the aura immediately. This was a shadow forged from true power. Elsewhere across the battlefield, more ice ruptured. High-ranking shadows, Greed, Igris, Tusk, broke free one after another. Their roars rolled like thunder, signaling a shift in the tide of war. The Frost Monarch observed Jinwoo closely. The earlier strike had appeared fatal. By all logic, the fight should have been nearing its conclusion. Yet Jinwoo rose. A faint smirk touched his lips, his icy gaze unwavering. Before the monarch's eyes, his wounds began to close. Flesh mended. Blood vanished. It was as though the damage had never existed. In a calm, controlled voice, Jinwoo activated his ability, status effect recovery. The injuries that had nearly ended him dissolved completely. Restored and resolute, he stood tall once more, facing the monarchs with renewed dominance. At that very moment, chaos rippled across the world. In cities like New York, London, Shanghai, and Paris, people froze in place, eyes fixed on screens broadcasting the catastrophe in Seoul. The colossal gate that had appeared over Korea had already shaken the globe, but now the live images of Jinwoo confronting the monarchs sent shockwaves through humanity. Among the few capable of perceiving the battle directly was Leonard. Watching from nearby, he could feel the surge of Jinwoo's power firsthand. And as that power rose, it became clear the battle was far from over. Wounded and surrounded by healers, Thomas Andre demanded to know what was happening. But even Leonard, who stood close enough to witness the clash, struggled to explain it. What unfolded before him felt less like a battle and more like the end of the world. A violent storm spiraling around Jinwoo, far beyond the understanding of ordinary humans. As Leonard watched, a chilling realization struck him. The Jinwoo he once knew was gone. The hunter who had steadily climbed the ranks had transformed into something else entirely. His growth in such a short span of time defied logic. From another vantage point, Beck observed in stunned silence. He had always believed Jinwoo possessed limitless potential, but even he had never imagined this level of power. What stood on that battlefield was no longer just a promising hunter. It was something far greater. Meanwhile, Baru finally broke free from the plague monarch's grasp. In one swift motion, he severed her grotesque nails, forcing a furious snarl from her lips. Enraged, she lunged at him without hesitation. But she failed to notice Jinwoo standing directly behind her. Daggers drawn, eyes blazing. For a fleeting instant, Jinwoo's thoughts returned to the prophecies spoken by the Creator, that he would one day die by a pillar of flames holding up the world. Yet there was one truth the prophecy had left unanswered, whether he would truly fall. Clenching his teeth, Jinwoo tightened his grip. Then he struck. His daggers became streaks of light, carving into the plague monarch with ruthless precision. Each blow landed with merciless force, metal tearing through flesh in a relentless barrage. Wounds blossomed across her body as he pressed forward, his fury unleashed without restraint. While their clash shook the battlefield, Seoul burned beneath waves of destruction. From afar, Lim Taejae watched the inferno with a heavy heart. For years, he had trusted his role as a sniper, strike at the decisive moment, from the perfect distance. Around the perimeter, the elite assassins of the Fiend Guild lay in wait atop buildings, ready to unleash supporting fire at his command. But doubt gripped him. Even if they intervened, how many would survive? The enemy they faced was not an ordinary foe. Not even Thomas Andre, the strongest hunter, had been able to subdue such a being. Lim's thoughts spiraled. Was it worth risking everything for a battle they might not influence at all? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him as heavily as the smoke-filled sky. Then, a cold hand settled on his shoulder. The sudden touch jolted him from his thoughts. His heart thundered as he sensed a presence behind him, unseen, yet unmistakably there. A voice whispered near his ear, calm and commanding, telling him to simply sit back and watch. Instinct took over. He spun around, arrow already drawn, bowstring taut, and ready to fire. His voice quivered as he demanded to know who was there. But there was no one. The rooftop stood empty. No footsteps. No shadow. No trace of another presence. Only silence answered him. The battle unfolding between Jinwoo and the Monarchs had long surpassed human comprehension. Those watching could neither interfere nor fully grasp what they were witnessing. All they could do was wait, instinctively aware that the end was approaching. The plague monarch's mutilated body began to writhe. Maggots churned beneath torn flesh, binding together in a grotesque dance of restoration. Limbs reformed, skin sealed. Within moments, she stood whole again, as though Jinwoo's relentless assault had never happened. The sight alone was enough to freeze the blood. Without pause, she retaliated. A violent surge of poisonous magic erupted outward, flooding the battlefield with a suffocating miasma. The air itself turned lethal. Jinwoo did not flinch. A system message flashed before his eyes. Venom effects detected in the atmosphere. Another followed almost instantly. Detoxification successfully completed. Poison held no dominion over him. The plague monarch's fury spiraled into madness. Her body twisted and expanded, transforming into a monstrous insectoid form. Massive mandibles snapped open as she lunged forward, determined to tear him apart. Before she could reach him, Jinwoo raised a hand. Ruler's authority. An invisible force crushed down upon her. Her charge halted mid-motion, her colossal body suspended in place as if pinned by the will of a god. No matter how she strained, she could not break free. Her teeth ground together in fury, but Jinwoo's control was absolute. With a flick of his hand, she was hurled back. Jinwoo moved instantly. Mutilation. His daggers blurred into streaks of black light. A dark aura engulfed the blades as they carved into her over and over again. Kamesh's wrath pulsed with ominous energy, slicing through flesh without resistance. Each strike tore deeper than the last. Her screams echoed across the battlefield. Jinwoo did not hesitate. He did not slow. He stripped away her monstrous body piece by piece, until nothing remained but fragments dissolving into shadow. As her existence crumbled, a strange calm settled over her. In her fading consciousness, she sensed something vast, an all-consuming darkness far more profound than death itself. And in her final breath, she found herself awed by its brilliance. A notification appeared. You have defeated one of the 9 monarchs, Koresha, the plague monarch. Then, you have leveled up. Messages cascaded one after another. From a distance, the frost monarch trembled. Disbelief laced his voice. This should have been impossible. Jinwoo had only recently inherited the Shadow Monarch's power. How could he wield it to such terrifying heights already? The ancient fear once associated with the Shadow Monarch was rising again. But beside him, the Beast Monarch merely scoffed. With a cruel grin, He seized Baru by the neck, lifting him effortlessly. His grip tightened, dismissing the Frost Monarch's anxiety. To him, Jinwoo's reliance on his shadow soldiers was proof of weakness. An incomplete monarch, he seemed to imply, can never rival the true ones. Baru shrieked in agony. His body flickered violently, his existence destabilizing. Jinwoo's eyes widened. The sensation was familiar. Baru's life force was being drained, just as the shadow placed on Thomas Andre had once been forcibly removed. Jinwoo attempted to recall him. The system answered coldly. Return impossible. For a split second, panic surged through him. Then his expression hardened. Without hesitation, Jinwoo charged. In a burst of overwhelming force, he struck the beast monarch with devastating power. The impact sent the towering figure flying across the battlefield, his grip on Baru broken at last. Baru fell free. Though Jinwoo had saved him from extinction, the cost of the battle weighed heavily on his shoulders. The war was not over, and the true storm was only beginning. The Frost Monarch's body began to expand, rising higher and higher as a towering glacier formed around him. Frost gathered in the air, and icy vapor spilled from his lips as he looked down at Jinwoo with open disdain. To him, Jinwoo's confidence was laughable. The power he wielded, though immense, had not yet matured under a true master. With a slow, deliberate motion, the Frost Monarch unsheathed his weapon, an otherworldly trident emanating a chilling, ancient aura. Its very presence seemed to freeze the air. No matter how tightly Jinwoo controlled his shadow soldiers, the monarch declared, he would simply cut the strings that bound them. He would trap them in eternal frost, forcing them into endless cycles of destruction and restoration, draining Jinwoo's mana until nothing remained. They would become parasites feeding on their own king. Then he attacked. The trident cleaved through the air, coated in lethal ice energy. Jinwoo crossed his daggers to block, but the impact was overwhelming. The blade grazed his shoulder, slicing deep. Blood spilled instantly, staining his clothes as pain surged through him. The Frost Monarch pressed on. With fluid precision, he spun through the air and brought the trident crashing down where Jinwoo had stood. The ground shattered beneath the blow, ice erupting outward in violent shockwaves. But Jinwoo had already vanished. Reappearing in a flash, he aimed directly for the monarch's eyes. His dagger streaked forward with deadly intent. The Frost Monarch reacted at the last instant, tilting his head just enough to avoid blindness. He countered immediately. The strike landed squarely on Jinwoo's torso. The force was catastrophic. Jinwoo felt his ribs crack as blood burst from his mouth. He was hurled across the battlefield, smashing into the asphalt and carving a trench through the ground before managing to halt his momentum. He steadied himself, breathing heavily, body screaming in protest. Yet even through the pain, he observed the monarch's speed, his rhythm, the flow of mana through each movement. The Frost Monarch advanced, relentless and cold. He sensed Jinwoo's injuries and sought to finish the battle quickly. Their weapons collided again and again, metal ringing sharply in the frozen air. Sparks and shards of ice scattered with every clash. Jinwoo's focus sharpened to its limit. If he could move just slightly faster, if he could predict even a fraction sooner, he could seize control of the fight. But the Frost Monarch's confidence never wavered. In his mind, this outcome had already been decided. Gripping his trident with both hands, he unleashed a devastating storm of ice. The ground split open as glacial energy tore across the battlefield in a sweeping wave of destruction. Before it could consume him, Jinwoo disappeared. In less than a heartbeat, he reappeared behind the Frost Monarch. His eyes locked onto his target. This was the opening. He prepared to strike. And then, the Frost Monarch turned his head slightly. A smug smile curved his lips. In that instant, Jinwoo's body froze. An invisible force seized him. His strength drained rapidly, as though something was siphoning his very essence. The battlefield dimmed. Sound faded. His vision blurred at the edges as darkness crept inward. The world itself seemed to fall silent. The onlookers, hunters and soldiers who had gathered at a distance, could only stare in stunned disbelief. They could not comprehend what had just occurred. And for the first time in the battle, Jinwoo's shadow flickered. A sudden, brutal force erupted through Jinwoo's chest. 5 razor-sharp claws burst from his back, slick with blood. The beast monarch had transformed fully, his towering werewolf form looming behind Jinwoo. Muscles bulged beneath coarse fur, and his massive claws had pierced clean through vital points. The strike had been deliberate, fatal. Kamesh's wrath slipped from Jinwoo's weakening grasp, clattering against the shattered ground below. The beast monarch leaned closer, tightening his grip. His claws sank deeper into flesh, savoring the moment as blood poured from Jinwoo's mouth. He mocked him openly, belittling the so-called successor of the Shadow Monarch. Jinwoo's body trembled. His level had risen. His strength had grown. By all logic, this battle should have been within reach. But logic meant nothing against this agony. As his consciousness wavered, the Frost Monarch stepped forward. His icy gaze held no mercy. In his hand was Jinwoo's own dagger, now encased in frost. Without hesitation, he drove it into Jinwoo's chest. The blade plunged deep. Blood surged outward, staining the frozen earth. Ice spread from the wound, creeping beneath Jinwoo's skin. The Frost Monarch twisted the dagger slowly, savoring every second. His voice dripped with contempt as he declared that there would be no recovery this time. No healing. No miracle. Jinwoo was incomplete, a mere fragment of the Shadow Monarch. An unfinished existence. As Jinwoo's strength drained away, the Frost Monarch continued speaking, painting a grim vision of the future. He spoke of mountains of corpses and rivers of blood, of humanity erased, of cities reduced to frozen tombs. And for Jinwoo's homeland, he promised something even crueler. Every living being would be encased in eternal ice, unable to live, unable to die. A frozen world locked in endless suffering. The monarch relished the thought. The cold from the dagger spread rapidly. Jinwoo's limbs went numb. His breathing slowed. His senses dulled as darkness swallowed the edges of his vision. His human heart beat once, twice, and then it stopped. Silence. Jinwoo's consciousness drifted into a vast, empty void, cold and boundless. A message echoed through the darkness. The player's HP has reached 0. The player has died. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, another notification appeared. The player possesses the Black Heart. A new window opened within the abyss. All requirements for a passive skill have been fulfilled. His skill list flickered and updated, symbols shifting as something ancient stirred deep within him. In the emptiness of death, an unknown force awakened. The darkness around him was no longer empty. It pulsed. Even in death, Jinwoo's story had not reached its end. It had only just begun. Sung Jinwoo's eyes flew open, his body stiff and soaked in sweat. For a moment, he couldn't understand what was real. Just seconds ago, he had been on a battlefield filled with chaos, surrounded by death. His hand immediately moved to his chest, certain that a cold dagger had pierced his heart. But there was nothing, no wound, no blood. He struggled to breathe as he looked around. A white ceiling, the sharp smell of disinfectant, a hard hospital bed beneath him. He was in a hospital. It didn't make sense. He had just been fighting the Monarchs, risking his life. Now it all felt distant, almost like a nightmare. But the memory was too clear, the icy blade, the freezing pain that spread through his body. And yet, he was alive, completely unharmed. Confusion filled his mind as he slowly sat up. Before he could gather his thoughts, the door opened and 2 men walked in. One of them was Wu Jinshul, the chief inspector of the surveillance team. Seeing him here shocked Jinwoo so much that he mistakenly called him chairman. Jinshul frowned, clearly confused, and exchanged a glance with the others beside him. Jinwoo stared at them, trying to make sense of everything. His thoughts were scattered. Why was he alive? Why was Jinshul acting like this? Jinshul spoke, correcting him. He wasn't the chairman. He was the chief inspector. Then he began asking strange questions about moving statues and how Jinwoo knew about them. Jinwoo froze. Moving statues, he knew exactly what that meant. But why was Jinshul talking about it now? Jinshul continued, explaining that the surveillance team and the White Tiger Guild had arrived after receiving a report. But Jinwoo barely listened. His mind was already racing elsewhere. This room, it felt familiar. Then it hit him. He had been here before. He had spent 2 weeks in this exact room after barely surviving the double dungeon. The bed, the walls, the atmosphere, it was all the same. A chilling sense of déjà vu washed over him. Jinshul casually mentioned that Jinwoo looked different from his photo. That small detail made everything feel even more unreal. It was like time itself had shifted, leaving Jinwoo stuck between past and present. Realizing he needed a moment to think, Jinwoo politely excused himself. Jinchul and the others left, giving him silence at last. But the silence didn't help. His mind was spinning. None of this made sense. Ignoring the unread notifications flashing in his vision, Jinwoo immediately checked his stats. Everything was still there. His abilities, his level, even Kamish Wrath. Nothing was missing. That's when the truth became impossible to ignore. He had gone back in time, and he had kept everything. But instead of feeling relieved, he felt uneasy. Why had this happened? What caused it? Before he could think further, the door burst open again. His younger sister, Jaina, rushed in. She looked worried, but also confused. She stared at him like she wasn't sure who he was. Jinwoo quickly realized why. His appearance had changed so much that, to her, it must have looked like he had transformed overnight. She hesitated, asking if he was really her brother. Jinwoo brushed it off, assuring her he was fine. Then he told her something unexpected. He was going to the Hunter Association to quit being a hunter. Jaina was shocked. This wasn't like him at all. But Jinwoo didn't change his mind. He knew she had rushed here from school, so he told her to go back to class. As he spoke, he glanced at Han Song-yi, who stood quietly behind her. He told her not to give up her studies to become a hunter. Song-yi was stunned. She didn't understand how he even knew her name. They had never met before. Jinwoo didn't explain. His thoughts drifted again. Even though he had lost his shadow army, he knew he could rebuild it. That wasn't the problem. The real question still remained. Why had he been sent back? Everything around him felt wrong. He had returned to the past, but nothing about it felt right. Sung Jinwoo arrived at the Hunter Association, walking quietly past a group of employees who were busy talking among themselves. They glanced at him with curiosity, whispering about how ordinary he looked. One of them mentioned that it had been 2 years since they had seen someone as impressive as Cha Hae-in, making it hard to believe that someone like Jinwoo, who looked almost homeless, could be an S-rank hunter. They recalled how the device used to measure magical power had once failed to read his abilities, leaving them stunned back then. Even now, they couldn't fully understand it. Jinwoo heard everything, but he didn't react. He had no interest in proving himself again. Instead, he calmly told them that before any test, he wanted to meet the chairman. The request caught the employee off guard. Meeting the chairman wasn't something people asked for so casually. Still, the employee hesitantly offered to escort him. Jinwoo declined, saying he already knew the way. As he walked through the halls with confidence, the employee couldn't help but feel confused. How could someone who wasn't supposed to know this place move around like he had been here many times before? Jinwoo stepped into the elevator and found himself standing beside a familiar face. Kong Tae-sik. Kong remained silent, but his thoughts were anything but calm. He was already thinking about what lie he would have to tell today. Deceiving the association wasn't new to him, but it was always risky. If Chief Inspector Wu Jinchul ever found out, the consequences would be severe. Then suddenly, Jinwoo spoke. His words caught Kong completely off guard. Jinwoo casually revealed that Kong wasn't on the association's watch list of high-ranking hunters, meaning he had never reported his ability to use stealth. Kong froze. How could Jinwoo possibly know that? Fear slowly crept into his chest, but Jinwoo didn't stop there. He continued, saying that soon, someone would ask Kong to avenge their daughter. Then came the warning, cold and direct. Jinwoo didn't care what happened to criminals, but if Kong ever harmed an innocent hunter, he would kill him. The weight of those words hit hard. Kong instinctively reached for the knife at his waist, only to realize it was gone. Panic surged through him. In that moment, he understood just how dangerous the man beside him truly was. Jinwoo, completely calm, gave him one last chance. A single warning. The elevator doors opened. Without another word, Jinwoo stepped out, leaving Kong frozen in fear. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Desperate and confused, Kong called out to him, unable to understand who Jinwoo really was, or how he knew so much. Jinwoo didn't answer. He walked straight down the hallway and entered the president's office. As he stepped inside, his expression subtly changed. To him, this wasn't the first time meeting Go Gun-hee, but in this timeline, it was. He greeted the president respectfully, though it felt strange. A notification appeared in his vision. Jinwoo didn't argue. Instead, he showed him. For a brief moment, Jinwoo released his full magical power. The room was instantly filled with an overwhelming presence, so intense that only someone truly powerful could even comprehend it. He was stunned. He had witnessed the strength of countless hunters, including those at the national level. But this was something entirely different. Jinwoo calmly stated that eliminating the ants on Jeju Island was something only he could do. To him, it wouldn't be a problem. And with that quiet confidence, Jinwoo moved forward, ready to rebuild his shadow army once again. It wasn't just a memory. Sung Jinwoo was living it all over again. The cycle had begun anew, dragging him back to the very start. Once again, he found himself in the dungeon filled with lizard-type monsters, reliving the moment he took down Dong Suk and his team. Then came Kong Taesik, the same man who had once tried to kill him. Again and again, the same message appeared before his eyes. Reset the world? The notifications wouldn't stop. They followed him through every moment, like an unending echo. The cycle continued. Jinwoo entered the Red Gate once more, fighting through it and gaining tank as his shadow soldier. Then came the Hunter's Guild Gate, where he defeated the High Orc Shaman and added Tusk to his growing army. Still, the notifications kept appearing. Relentless, unavoidable. He moved on to the Demon Castle, securing the Holy Water of Life and saving his mother from her endless sleep. Every event unfolded exactly as before, as if he were trapped in a perfectly recreated timeline. Then, Jeju Island. The battlefield stretched before him, covered in the remains of ant-type magic beasts. At his feet lay the lifeless body of the Ant King. Without hesitation, Jinwoo raised his hand. The notifications didn't stop. Reset the world? Over and over. This time, Jinwoo had enough. Reliving everything made one thing painfully clear. No matter how many battles he fought, no matter how powerful his army became, it would never fill the emptiness inside him. This cycle had to end. His thoughts sharpened. This wasn't reality. It couldn't be. Something was manipulating him, forcing him to repeat everything. The energy around him felt artificial, unnatural. A lie. Darkness began to close in, but Jinwoo didn't resist. Instead, his power surged. From beneath his feet, the Monarch's domain spread outward, swallowing everything in its path. Baru, his shadow soldiers, the corpses, the land, the sea, even the sky, were consumed. The world turned into pure shadow. From within that endless darkness, a figure stepped forward. Its silhouette cut through the void, clad in intricate armor unlike anything Jinwoo had seen before. Its presence alone made the air feel heavy. Then it spoke. Its deep voice echoed across the darkness, offering Jinwoo a choice: to remain here forever, in a perfect world shaped like a dream. But Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He saw through it. This world was false. His voice broke the silence as he questioned the figure. Was it asking him to accept this illusion? The answer came calmly. No. This illusion was created by Jinwoo himself. The word struck him. The figure moved closer, explaining that this world was born from Jinwoo's deepest desires, his wish to change the past, to fix his mistakes. Combined with the figure's power, it had formed this realm. A realm of death. An eternal rest with no escape. Death had always been there, watching Jinwoo every time he stood on the edge between life and death. And now, it stood before him. The figure spoke again, its presence overwhelming. I am death itself. Eternal rest. Endless terror. The shadow of your soul. I am you. Within this dark realm, Jinwoo could do anything. The power here was limitless. To prove it, the figure glanced at a massive tree, and in an instant, it transformed into a delicate flower. Creation, destruction, absolute control. All of it belonged to Jinwoo. The figure revealed that they shared the same power. It had watched him for a long time, waiting for this moment, for their meeting. Finally, it revealed its identity. The Shadow Monarch, the King of Death. Jinwoo, shaken but determined, demanded to know why he had been chosen. But instead of answering, the Shadow Monarch raised a single armored finger and pressed it against Jinwoo's forehead. Reality shattered. The world twisted violently as visions flooded his mind. The monarch's voice echoed once more, promising to show him everything, the beginning, the end, and the truth of his existence. Far away, in the real world, A terrifying silence fell. Their eyes widened as an impossible sound echoed through the battlefield. A heartbeat. Slow, heavy, unnatural. It was coming from Sung Jinwoo's chest. The very heart they had pierced moments ago was beating again. Shock and unease spread across their faces. The Beast Monarch and the Frost Monarch exchanged tense glances, struggling to understand what was happening. They had believed that killing Jinwoo's body would also destroy the Shadow Monarch within him, just as death would claim any other being. But the Shadow Monarch did not follow the same rules. Death came for everyone. But for the King of the Dead, death could be the beginning. That realization hit them hard. Panic set in. They knew they couldn't let Jin Wu rise again. Not like this. If the true Shadow Monarch awakened, everything would be lost. Without hesitation, both monarchs lunged forward, aiming to destroy him before he could fully revive. But before their attacks could land, the Beast Monarch was struck. A brutal blow smashed into his face, sending him staggering backward. He barely had time to react before another strike followed, even more powerful than the first. The force launched him into the air before slamming him into the ground, creating a massive shockwave. The battlefield trembled. A figure stood between the monarchs and Jin Wu. Among the emissaries, there was one who shone brighter than all the rest, a being of immense power known as the brightest fragment of luminosity. But even he grew tired of the endless bloodshed, tired of the war that never ended. Driven by frustration and desperation, he approached the absolute being, demanding answers. Why didn't their creator intervene? Why allow such suffering to continue? He begged for power, enough strength to finally end the monarchs and bring peace. He even offered to present their enemies' heads as a final tribute. But there was no response, only silence. And in that silence, a terrible truth revealed itself. The war was nothing more than entertainment. The absolute being didn't care who won. The endless battle, the suffering, the deaths. It was all a spectacle. Even so, the emissaries continued to obey. They worshipped their creator, praised it through war, and followed its laws without question. But no matter what they did, death was always the end. The brightest fragment understood it clearly now. As long as the absolute being existed, the war would never stop. It would continue forever. So, the emissaries made a choice. They turned their blades against their own creator. Thus began the rebellion. Not out of loyalty to the monarchs, but out of a desire to end a meaningless war. The Shadow Monarch stood before Jin Wu, showing him a vision of the past. At the front of the battlefield stood a six-winged being, the brightest fragment of luminosity. That had once been him. He was the only emissary who refused to join the rebellion. Even as the others rose against the absolute being, he stood alone, trying to stop them. But he was outnumbered. His army was crushed. Defeat was inevitable. He believed it was the end. But when he opened his eyes again, he was in darkness, a deep, endless abyss. And there, he discovered something hidden within him all along. A power placed by the absolute being itself. A failsafe. Something meant to awaken when everything else had fallen. In that void, something new was born. The King of the Dead. His wings, once symbols of light, were torn away. In their place, he forged new armor from pure darkness. And as he embraced this power, he called upon death itself. At his command, the silence of the abyss shattered. The countless souls lost in that endless darkness began to stir, then rise. They answered him. The Shadow Monarch returned to the world, no longer alone. Behind him marched a legion born from death itself, soldiers forged from shadows and bound by his will. This was his true rebirth, not as an emissary of light, but as the King of the Dead. Calm and resolute, the Shadow Monarch continued his story. After awakening to his new power and gathering his army, he returned to the battlefield. But everything had already changed. The remaining fragments of brilliant light had turned against the absolute being. They had killed their creator. Taking its power for themselves, they declared their new identity, the rulers. With their newfound authority, the rulers wielded tools infused with the absolute being's power to hunt down the monarchs. One of the first victims was Legia, the king of giants, who was captured by them. This shattered the balance. The monarchs were pushed into a desperate situation. With no other choice, they sought an alliance with the Shadow Monarch. And he accepted. From that moment on, He no longer fought as a servant of light. He fully embraced his role as the Shadow Monarch, leading his army of the dead into an endless war. Time favored him. Every battle left behind more corpses, more souls, fuel for his growing army. With each passing clash, his power only increased. As the war escalated, he formed an alliance with the Arm of Destruction, led by the King of Wild Dragons. Together, their combined forces became one of the most terrifying powers on the battlefield. But that power came with a cost. Even his allies began to fear him. The Monarch of White Flames and the Beast Monarch grew uneasy. His strength had reached a level that rivaled even the destructive force of the dragons. And fear led to betrayal. In a sudden act of treachery, the Monarch of White Flames, Baron, and the Beast Monarch turned against him. The result was devastating. His once mighty shadow army was nearly wiped out. The very strength that had made him unstoppable had now made him a target. The Beast Monarch fled, abandoning everything. Baron, however, paid with his life. Then, from the sky, a group of 6 winged beings descended. They were surrounded by the rulers. Exhausted and weakened, the Shadow Monarch could no longer command his army. He stood alone, expecting to be erased. But instead, the rulers knelt. Their leader stepped forward, calling him by an old name, the greatest fragment of luminosity. With a quiet voice, he asked for forgiveness. There was no longer any reason to continue the war. The Shadow Monarch was stunned. These were the same beings who had once stood beside him and then turned against everything. Memories flooded back, fighting on the front lines, leading the army of brilliant light. But the pain of betrayal remained stronger. His anger surged. How could they speak of peace after striking down their own creator? The ruler admitted it calmly. The absolute being had been their master as well. That answer only deepened the wound. In a burst of fury, the Shadow Monarch grabbed the ruler by the face, his grip filled with rage. To him, their actions were unforgivable. They had betrayed the very being they were meant to serve. Still, the rulers did not resist. They pleaded with him. They didn't want war anymore. They reminded him of something painful, that he, too, understood what it meant to raise a hand against one's own master. Those words struck deep, but the anger didn't fade. In frustration and bitterness, the Shadow Monarch demanded that they end it. If peace was truly what they wanted, then they should strike him down, pierce his heart, and claim their victory. But the rulers refused. Instead, they asked him to let go of his rage and forgive. For a brief moment, the Shadow Monarch hesitated, and in that silence, his gaze shifted. For the first time, he noticed them, his soldiers, standing quietly behind him. They were the army of brilliant light, the same soldiers who had stood beside him through countless battles, through victory and despair alike. Now, they watched him in silence, their concern unmistakable as their master struggled under the weight of everything he had endured. For the first time, the Shadow Monarch felt powerless. Despite all his strength, all his authority over death itself, he couldn't find an answer to the pain consuming him. The endless war, the betrayals, the loss of comrades, even the fall of his creator, it had pushed him to the edge. Revenge had carried him this far. But now, with the rulers kneeling for peace and his soldiers looking to him for direction, that purpose began to crumble. Lost and conflicted, the Shadow Monarch chose to withdraw. Driven still by vengeance, he hid himself away. After sealing the Monarch of White Flames within his own body, he planned to recover his strength before striking back, this time against the Beast Monarch. But while he remained hidden, the world changed. The Monarchs, weakened and scattered, were hunted down and defeated by the rulers. The balance of power shifted once again, all while he waited in the shadows. When the Shadow Monarch finally returned, he found what remained of the Monarchs attempting to flee, escaping through cracks between dimensions in search of survival. Before anything could unfold, the Dragon King intervened. Recognizing the dire state they were in, the Dragon King saw an opportunity. Instead of conflict, he proposed unity. The Monarchs needed to recover, to rebuild, and the Shadow Monarch's power was essential. An alliance was formed. Together, they began searching for a new world, a place where they could grow stronger, hidden from the rulers. As they traveled across dimensions, countless worlds passed before their eyes. Planets, galaxies, entire systems flickering like distant memories. Until they stopped. Earth. The Shadow Monarch acknowledged it without hesitation. To humanity, the arrival of the Monarchs must have felt like sudden destruction, something incomprehensible. Their power was overwhelming, unstoppable. Everything in their path was erased without mercy. Earth became the next battlefield, a place where the Monarchs would rebuild and prepare for war. Jinwoo stood still, absorbing it all. Images filled his mind, cities burning, skies collapsing, people vanishing in chaos. The vision felt painfully familiar. He had seen it before. In the demon castle. A question formed in his mind. Was this the future? The Shadow Monarch's voice answered calmly. No, this was not the future. It was the past. Everything he was witnessing had already happened. The truth unfolded piece by piece. The Monarchs existed to destroy. The rulers existed to maintain order after the fall of the Absolute Being. When the Monarchs descended upon Earth, destruction followed. By the time the rulers reacted, it was already too late. Another world had fallen. Fury consumed the rulers. And in their desperation, they turned to something they had long forbidden. The cup of reincarnation. A divine tool holding the power of the Absolute Being itself. With it, they could turn back time, rewinding the world by 10 years. They used it, again and again, trying to fix what had already been lost. But there was a problem. Earth was too weak. It lacked the magical energy needed to endure the scale of war between the Monarchs and the rulers. No matter who won, the result would always be the same. Total destruction. So, the rulers made a harsh decision. They couldn't save everyone, but they could save some. Those who survived would carry on what remained of the world. That was when Jin Wu understood. Hunters. They weren't chosen by chance. They were created. The Shadow Monarch confirmed it. The rulers had given humans power, just enough to fight, just enough to survive. Hunters were meant to be humanity's final defense, their only chance to endure the inevitable clash between higher beings. Jinwoo fell silent. The weight of that truth settled heavily on him. If the world ever learned this, that only a small number of people could survive, while everyone else was destined to perish, could society even continue to exist? The thought was terrifying. Then another realization struck him. The demon king he had once fought wasn't real in the way he had believed. It was only a fragment, a leftover memory tied to the Shadow Monarch's past. A shadow of something far greater. A chilling conclusion formed in Jinwoo's mind. This wasn't the first time. The world had already been destroyed, over and over again. The cycle had repeated endlessly. The Shadow Monarch confirmed it. While beings like the Monarchs and the rulers couldn't directly control time, they could perceive its changes. Each use of the cup of reincarnation reset the world, but they retained their awareness. They remembered every cycle, every failure, every destruction. And now, Jinwoo understood. He wasn't just part of this war. He was standing at the center of an endless loop, one that had been repeating long before he was ever born. The Shadow Monarch continued, revealing the truth behind the endless cycle. The rulers had used the power of the cup of reincarnation again and again, trying to correct the flow of events. Each time the world was reset, they adjusted their strategies, hoping for a different outcome. But the Monarchs adapted as well. With every reset, they changed their plans, learning, evolving, countering the rulers at every step. The cycle repeated so many times that eventually, even the divine tool of the Absolute Being reached its limit. It could no longer be used. That truth unsettled Jinwoo deeply. Even powers that govern reality itself had limits. The Shadow Monarch explained calmly, no power was infinite. Not even the Absolute Being, who once created entire worlds, had been beyond defeat. In the end, even he had fallen to his own creations. Everything had a breaking point. Still trying to grasp it all, Jinwoo questioned how such a thing had been possible. How could creations overthrow their creator? The Shadow Monarch gave a simple answer. It was no different from humans being destroyed by the machines they created. The Monarchs, learning from the rulers, began to form their own strategy. Just as the rulers had given humans power, allowing them to fight magical beasts and strengthen the world, the Monarchs sought to use humanity as well. But their method was darker. They planned to descend into the human world by taking over human bodies, using them as vessels to manifest their power far earlier than the rulers expected. And that wasn't all. They intended to turn the very magic spread across Earth into a weapon. The energy meant to strengthen humanity would instead become a trap, one designed to destroy the rulers when they arrived. Earth itself would become the battlefield. Humanity would be caught in the middle. Jinwoo began to understand the scale of it. The monarchs weren't just invading. They were preparing to wipe out the rulers in a single decisive strike. The Shadow Monarch confirmed it. However, there was a limitation. For a sovereign to descend into the human world, they needed a host strong enough to contain their power. And for beings like the Shadow Monarch or the Monarch of Destruction, that requirement was nearly impossible. No ordinary human body could withstand it. At that time, the Monarch of Transformation had a powerful mage working under him. The Architect. He approached the Shadow Monarch with an offer. He would find a suitable human vessel, but in return, he demanded an imperishable body. There was a problem. The Shadow Monarch's power was tied to death itself. No living being could naturally become his vessel. But the Architect didn't give up. Using a system he created, he began searching for a human who could endure that power. The criteria were extreme: someone with awareness of magic, physical endurance, mental resilience. And above all, someone who had repeatedly faced death and survived. The search was long and difficult, until he found one. A man who had always been weak, always on the brink of death. Yet somehow he never died. Sung Jinwoo. Through sheer persistence, he had broken the limits placed on him. Even the Architect hesitated, doubting Jinwoo's suitability. But the Shadow Monarch had been watching him for a long time. Watching him struggle. Watching him survive. And he made his decision. Jinwoo would be his vessel. His successor. "I chose you," the Shadow Monarch declared. "You are the record of your struggles, the proof of your resistance, and the reward for your pain." Jinwoo fell silent, reflecting on everything. He realized that even after surpassing expectations, he hadn't been strong enough at first to fully handle the Shadow Monarch's power. The Shadow Monarch confirmed it. That was why the system existed. The Architect had designed it to slowly transform Jinwoo, level by level. By making it feel like a game, it guided his growth, steadily preparing his body and mind to handle the power he would eventually inherit. Every quest, every battle, every level up, it was all part of that preparation. The system wasn't random. It was deliberate. Jinwoo understood now why it had felt like a game. But one question still remained. Why did the Shadow Monarch betray the Architect? For the first time, the Shadow Monarch paused. He didn't answer immediately. It was as if even he had to think about it. He spoke slowly, recalling the past, the apology of the rulers, the betrayal of the monarchs. He had spent a long time deciding where he truly belonged. In the end, he made his choice, and he accepted it fully. But something had changed along the way. As he watched Jinwoo grow, something unexpected happened. A sense of peace, something close to contentment. Perhaps he didn't want to lose him, or perhaps it was something deeper. At some point, the line between them had blurred. The Shadow Monarch had become Jinwoo, and Jinwoo had become the Shadow Monarch. Their connection was no longer separate. They were one. And now, a choice stood before him. The Shadow Monarch offered it calmly. Jinwoo could remain here, within the domain of death. A place where he could rest forever, free from pain, free from war, free from the endless struggles that had defined his life. An eternal dream. Or, he could return. But if Jinwoo chose not to rest, he would return to reality, where his enemies were still waiting. The war would continue. As he took in everything, his gaze shifted to the destruction caused by the Dragon King and his army. Entire worlds torn apart, endless ruin. A question formed in his mind. Why had the Shadow Monarch, who once chose not to fight, left that world with the monarchs instead of siding with the rulers? The answer was simple. That world had no place for him. He didn't belong there. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. His answer was the same. He wouldn't stay in the eternal dream. He wouldn't rest. The Shadow Monarch smiled faintly, as if he had already known Jinwoo's choice. This was exactly why he had chosen him. Jinwoo repeated it clearly. This wasn't where he belonged. The Shadow Monarch accepted his decision. And with that, they stood at the edge of their final farewell. The Shadow Monarch, ready for his eternal rest, knew that Jinwoo, now his successor, would carry everything forward. There would be no more meetings between them. For the first time in ages, he looked at peace. He explained that Jinwoo's power was now complete. Just as Jin Wu had symbolically died, he had been fully reborn as the true Shadow Monarch. The path ahead was clear. Jin Wu understood. The Shadow Monarch gave one last smile, satisfied. After wandering endlessly, he had finally found closure. He stepped back. Jin Wu nodded. And then, he spoke a single word. Arise. At that moment, countless notifications flooded his vision. The system began to collapse. A message appeared. The deletion code for the player development system had been activated. The system that had guided and restricted Jinwoo's growth was now coming to an end. As it prepared to disappear, it revealed the truth. All limits on Jinwoo's power had been removed. His shadow soldiers, once bound by restrictions, were restored to their full strength. Martial Igris regained his true power. Baru, the former Ant King, grew even stronger than before. And Ashborn, the previous Shadow Monarch, returned to the endless void. His role was finally complete. The system presented its final choice. Delete permanently? Yes or no? Jinwoo didn't hesitate. Yes. The moment he made his decision, a violent surge of energy erupted. A powerful shockwave blasted across the battlefield, forcing the Beast Monarch and Frost Monarch backward. A blinding light followed, shaking the very air around them. The Frost Monarch's expression twisted with fury. He realized what was happening. The disaster before them was far worse than they had imagined. Rage filled his voice as he shouted, unable to accept it. The rulers had protected this human. Sung Il-hwan stood in their way, and now everything was spiraling out of control. The two monarchs exchanged a glance. Time was running out. They had to stop this, no matter what. But Sung Il-hwan didn't move. Calm and resolute, he gripped his daggers in reverse, silently preparing. The Beast Monarch and Frost Monarch charged from opposite sides. Fast, relentless. But Il-hwan was ready. He deflected the Beast Monarch's claws, twisted away from the Frost Monarch's spear, and struck back with precise, calculated movements. Every step, every counter, showed the experience of countless battles. The Beast Monarch attacked again, wild, brutal swings meant to tear him apart. Il-hwan dodged cleanly, striking back without hesitation. The Frost Monarch thrust his weapon forward, but Il-hwan moved faster, slipping past every attack with perfect timing. Frustration grew. The Frost Monarch realized. Il-hwan wasn't just reacting. He was predicting. Every movement, every strike, Il-hwan was reading them. The Beast Monarch noticed it too. This wasn't luck. This was mastery. Then, the Frost Monarch inhaled deeply, preparing a freezing attack powerful enough to end the fight. But before he could release it, Il-hwan moved. A sharp kick struck under his chin, launching him into the sky like a projectile. His body vanished into the distance like a falling star. For a brief moment, Il-hwan's focus shifted. That was all the Beast Monarch needed. He lunged forward, jaws wide open, aiming to swallow him whole. But Il-hwan reacted instantly. He drove his dagger straight into the creature's mouth. A roar of pain erupted as the blade lodged deep inside. Before the Beast Monarch could recover, Il-hwan followed up with a crushing punch to his ribs. The impact landed hard. But this time, the Beast Monarch endured it. With a sudden motion, he grabbed Il-hwan and hurled him away. The Beast Monarch hurled Sung Il-hwan aside like a rag doll, rage burning in his eyes. With a furious snarl, he ripped the dagger from his jaws, blood dripping as he growled. I'll tear you apart. But then, something changed. A strange, suffocating presence filled the air. The Beast Monarch dropped to all fours, instincts screaming at him. Slowly, he turned his gaze and froze. The barrier surrounding Sung Jinwoo was cracking. Thin fractures spread across it, and through those cracks, a terrifying glow emerged. Jinwoo's eyes, shining through the darkness with overwhelming power. The Beast Monarch felt it instantly. Jinwoo was awakening, and the true battle was about to begin. Nearby, the Frost Monarch rose from the dust, his body aching but his resolve unshaken. He steadied himself and signaled for another joint attack. But the Beast Monarch didn't move. The Frost Monarch stared at him in disbelief. After everything they had done, after coming this far, he was backing down? It made no sense. But the Beast Monarch's instincts were sharper. He could feel it. The air itself had changed. Something far more terrifying than anything they had faced was taking form. The true Shadow Monarch was about to emerge, and he wanted no part of it. He had agreed to fight under one assumption, that they would face Jin Wu while he was still incomplete. But now, this was different. The Frost Monarch tried to provoke him, reminding him of his pride, of his title as the King of Beasts. It didn't matter. The Beast Monarch had felt that power once before, and he wasn't about to face it again. Without another word, he created a gate. Time was running out. Before stepping through, he gave the Frost Monarch one last glance, a silent acknowledgement, almost like a farewell. He wished him luck. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. Then he disappeared, leaving the Frost Monarch alone. Rage exploded. The Frost Monarch cursed him, his fury boiling over. Abandoned at the worst possible moment, he had no choice left. He would destroy everything. His body transformed into a raging storm, a living blizzard that swallowed the battlefield. Thunder roared as freezing winds tore through everything in sight. He gathered immense mana. The air crystallized. Thousands, tens of thousands, of deadly icicles formed, each one sharp enough to pierce through anything. They launched forward like a storm of spears, devastating everything in their path. Cars were thrown aside. Buildings shattered. The entire area was torn apart. And yet, Sung Il Huan stood his ground. Even as the ice tore into his body, leaving deep wounds, he didn't move. He endured it all, protecting Jin Wu no matter the cost. The Frost Monarch couldn't understand it. To him, humans were nothing, weak, insignificant beings. And yet, this man stood before him, still fighting, still resisting. Enraged, the Frost Monarch raised his arm, gathering even more power. A massive column of ice formed above, towering, overwhelming, unstoppable. This wasn't just an attack. It was annihilation. He would bury both Il Huan and Jin Wu beneath it, seal them forever in ice. The massive pillar began to fall. Il Huan braced himself, raising his frozen arms in a final attempt to block it. But before it could strike, something moved. A blur of shadow shot forward. Baru. With a single strike, he tore through the descending ice column, shattering it into countless fragments. The battlefield trembled again. Then, another presence emerged. Igris stepped forward, clad in pitch-black armor, a crimson plume flowing behind him. His sword glowed as he drove it into the ground. His voice echoed coldly across the battlefield. Do not assume the position of a king with such insignificant power. The Frost Monarch's eyes widened. His attack had been destroyed effortlessly. And then he understood. The commander-ranked shadow soldiers had regained their full power. That could only mean one thing. The Shadow Monarch had returned. Through the settling dust and fading storm, a figure walked forward. Calm, unshaken. Sung Jin Wu. Jin Wu muttered quietly, almost to himself. This is why I don't trust prophecies. Behind him, Baru and Igris immediately knelt, bowing their heads to their king. Jinwoo's cold gaze swept across the battlefield. In an instant, he understood. The Beast Monarch had fled. He had chosen escape over facing what was coming. Only the Frost Monarch remained, frozen in place, still trying to process what had just happened. Jin Wu stood amidst the Rizrush, his voice calm but absolute as it echoed through the air. Who dares to leave without my permission? The Frost Monarch felt it fully now. The difference in power. Jin Wu wasn't just stronger, he was overwhelming. Like an unbreakable wall standing before him, impossible to surpass. For a moment, the Frost Monarch couldn't even move. But Jin Wu ignored him completely. Instead, he closed his eyes. His awareness expanded outward, spreading far beyond the battlefield, across the entire land. He searched, reaching through every trace of magic, locking onto a familiar presence. The Beast Monarch. As long as he wasn't hiding between dimensions, Jin Wu could find him. And he did. A faint smile touched his lips as he opened his eyes. He had found his prey. In that exact moment, the Frost Monarch saw his chance. It was small, fleeting, possibly his only one. Jinwoo's attention had shifted. That was enough. Desperation took over. Gathering every ounce of strength he had left, the Frost Monarch poured it all into a single attack. His spear expanded, growing massive, radiating lethal energy. With everything on the line, he threw it. The spear tore through the air like a missile, aimed straight at Jinwoo. This was his final strike, his last hope. But Jinwoo moved. Without even turning fully, he raised his hand. Ruler's authority. The spear stopped. Midair, completely frozen. Mana wrapped around it, twisting, bending, warping its shape until it became useless, broken beyond repair. The attack was nothing. The Frost Monarch stood there, stunned. Everything he had meant nothing. That was the difference between them. Jinwoo turned his gaze back toward him, eyes colder than ever. He hadn't forgotten. There was still a debt to settle. But not now. Calmly, he spoke, making it clear that the Frost Monarch's time would come. For now, he would wait. Elsewhere, the Beast Monarch stepped through his portal into his jungle hideout, expecting safety. But the moment he arrived, something felt wrong. A suffocating pressure filled the air, like an invisible noose tightening around his neck. Death. It was everywhere. His instincts screamed at him. He had wasted time arguing, and now it had cost him. The jungle itself felt alive, tense, watching. Then, the shadows moved. Not naturally, not normally. And then he smelled it. Death. Close. Too close. From within his own domain. His heart pounded as realization struck. He wasn't alone. From the ground beneath him, Jinwoo rose. His presence filled the entire space, an overwhelming force of death itself. The Beast Monarch froze. Every instinct he had, every experience from countless battles, told him the same thing. He couldn't win. He couldn't escape. There was only one option left. Submit. Slowly, the Beast Monarch lowered himself to the ground, bowing his head. The King of Beasts. Reduced to surrender. He didn't want to fight anymore. Not against this. Not against him. Silently, he pleaded for his life. If survival meant abandoning pride, so be it. He offered himself. An alliance. He spoke of the future, the return of the King of Dragons, and promised that when the time came, he and his army would stand beside Jinwoo. Anything. Just to live. Fear had stripped the Beast Monarch of everything. His pride, his arrogance, leaving only survival instinct behind. Kneeling before Jinwoo, he lowered his head even further. Jinwoo looked down at him, expression cold, unreadable. The Beast Monarch sensed an opening. A faint, hidden smile crept across his face. In his mind, he believed he had succeeded. There was no way the true Shadow Monarch would forgive someone like him. Someone who had betrayed him before and tried to destroy his vessel. That was exactly why he believed Jinwoo could be deceived. He thought he had exploited Jinwoo's humanity. For now, he would submit. Later, when the King of Dragons returned, he would strike back and tear Jinwoo apart. That was his plan. But Jinwoo spoke. And in that moment, everything shattered. Before any alliance could be discussed, Jinwoo said, there was a debt to settle. He reminded the Beast Monarch of the 5 scars his claws had carved into his heart. The condition was simple. Survive 5 attacks. Then he would consider forgiveness. The Beast Monarch froze. Cold realization hit him. This wasn't mercy. It was a sentence. A trap. There had never been any intention to forgive him. Rage exploded from deep within him. He roared, the sound shaking the jungle as fury and desperation took over. Even if he was going to die, he would not go down without a fight. Not quietly. Not submissively. His body began to change. He transformed into his true form, a massive wolf, towering over everything around him. Power surged from him as his fur bristled, his presence turning feral and violent. But Jinwoo didn't move. Calm. Unshaken. He drew his dagger. Kamish wrath. The blade gleamed coldly. And then, he vanished. The Beast Monarch's eyes widened, but it was already too late. A sharp gust of wind passed his face. And then came the pain. A deep, burning agony tore through him. Jinwoo had already struck. Too fast to see. Too fast to react. Blood burst into the air as one of the Beast Monarch's massive limbs was severed cleanly, spinning away before crashing to the ground. A howl of pain echoed through the jungle. Jinwoo reappeared, holding his daggers, his gaze fixed on the fallen monarch. Cold. Final. For left. Elsewhere, the Frost Monarch stood trapped. There was no easy escape. Victory was impossible. Running, seemed like the only option. But then his eyes shifted. Toward Baru. Toward Igris. He quickly analyzed the situation. Baru was occupied, focused on healing the injured humans. Not an immediate threat. But Igris was different. The Frost Monarch recognized him instantly. The armored knight. One of the strongest soldiers of the Shadow Monarch. Now fully restored. That changed everything. As long as Jin Wu had mana, his soldiers could regenerate endlessly. But the Frost Monarch. Then, casually, he tossed something into the air. The Frost Monarch's eyes widened as he caught it. Wolf fangs. There was no mistaking them. They belonged to the Beast Monarch. Jinwoo's voice followed, cold and absolute. The message was clear. The Beast Monarch was dead. For a moment, the Frost Monarch couldn't process it. His mind struggled to keep up with reality. In the short time Jin Wu had disappeared, he had killed him? It felt impossible. And yet, the proof was in his hands. Jin Wu stood tall, his presence overwhelming, as he declared that the deaths of the Plague Monarch, the Beast Monarch, and soon, the Frost Monarch, would serve as a warning to all who remained. Panic took hold. Desperate, the Frost Monarch quickly formed ice arrows, preparing to strike. But he never got the chance. A flash, and pain exploded through his body. Jinwoo's dagger, Kamish Wrath, had already pierced his shoulder. Blood sprayed as the force of the blow staggered him backward. Still, he tried to fight. Gathering cold energy, he prepared one final attack, drawing power into his mouth, ready to unleash everything he had left. But Jinwoo was faster. In an instant, he closed the distance. His hand clamped over the Frost Monarch's mouth, sealing the energy inside. The Monarch thrashed wildly, unable to release it. Too late. Jinwoo moved again. A single slash. Clean. Precise. The sound of cracking bones echoed as the blade tore through him. Ribs shattered. His heart pierced in one motion. Jinwoo's eyes remained cold. Unmoved. He reminded him quietly. The Beast Monarch had fallen on the fourth strike. Now, it was his turn. The Frost Monarch's vision trembled as fear overtook him. The pain was overwhelming, his strength fading rapidly. He let out a broken cry, rage and terror mixed together. The icy armor that once defined him began to crack, then crumble. Piece by piece, it fell away, revealing the fragile form beneath. And then, nothing. His body disintegrated into dust, carried away by the wind. Silence followed. The battlefield was over. Jinwoo stood in silence, watching as the last traces of the Frost Monarch scattered into the air and vanished. It was over. With that final blow, he had avenged not only himself, but also President Go Gun-hee. A long-standing debt had finally been settled. His gaze lingered for a moment longer before he turned away, ready to move forward. Baru approached quickly, bowing his head with unwavering loyalty. Jinwoo acknowledged him with a slight nod, then asked about the man who had protected him earlier, the one who had appeared in the middle of the battle and vanished just as suddenly. There was a hint of concern in his eyes. As he scanned the battlefield, something caught his attention. On the ground, a dagger. He picked it up, recognizing it instantly. Not far away, Sung Il Huan leaned against the remains of a half-destroyed building. His hood had fallen back, revealing his worn face, disheveled hair, a rough beard, and a body covered in wounds. He struggled to steady his breathing. The power he carried. It was too much for a human body. Even for him. He could feel it. His time was running out. For a moment, he closed his eyes, reflecting on everything, the choices he had made, the burden he had carried. This was how it was meant to end. Running away again? Jinwoo's voice cut through the silence. Calm, but heavy. Il Huan's eyes opened slowly. Jinwoo stepped closer, his expression steady but filled with something deeper, something unresolved. Why did you leave without saying anything? There was a pause. Then, a single word. Dad. The air grew still. Sung Il Huan looked at his son, and for the first time, there was no distance between them, no shadows, no secrecy. He began to speak. He explained everything. About the gates, massive openings that connected their world to others, bringing monsters into reality. Normally, hunters could clear them, defeat the boss, and escape within a time limit. But for him, there had been no escape. He had been trapped in the dimension rift. And there, he encountered something far greater than anything on Earth. The war between the rulers and the monarchs. The rulers, sensing the threat of the monarchs and the eventual rise of the Shadow Monarch, had made a choice. They gave him power, not as a gift, but as a mission. He was to return to Earth as their emissary, to stop the monarchs, to protect the world. He hadn't had a choice. He accepted. But even with that power, even with that mission, there was something he couldn't do. He couldn't bring himself to stop his own son. He had watched Jinwoo from afar all this time, seen his struggles, seen him grow stronger, and yet, he remained distant, silent, bound by duty, and torn by something far more human. As Jinwoo's power continued to grow, the perspective of the rulers began to change. At first, their only concern had been simple: stop the complete emergence of the Shadow Monarch at any cost. But over time, they realized something far more unsettling. The monarch's plan to destroy the world could not be stopped by ordinary means. Not by humans. Not even by the rulers alone. There was only one power capable of standing against that level of destruction: the Shadow Monarch. And so, their goal shifted. The brightest fragment of light issued a new command: protect the Shadow Monarch. It was a risky decision. They understood that if they allowed the Shadow Monarch to fully awaken, they were placing their faith in something unpredictable. They didn't know which side he would ultimately choose, humanity or the monarchs. But the threat ahead left them no choice. The Dragon King's army would arrive before the forces of the heavens could intervene. If that happened, there would be nothing left to save. Standing in the present, Sung Il Huan finally understood. Watching Jinwoo now, seeing the path he had chosen, he knew he had made the right decision. Everything he had done, guiding Jinwoo from the shadows, protecting him in secret, had led to this moment. Still, there was a part of him that wished his son had never seen this side of him. The burden, the conflict, the distance. Jinwoo's eyes closed. Tears slipped down his face. The rain fell quietly around them, blending with the silence. Their relationship had been fractured for so long, but the bond between them had never truly broken. Il Huan's voice softened. Did you ever hate me? Jinwoo didn't answer right away. His head lowered. Sometimes. The word came out quietly. Honest. He remembered those days, when he was weak, barely surviving as a hunter, when every fight felt like his last. In those moments, he thought of his father. Anger would rise. But so would something else. Longing. I missed you. The confession hung in the air. Il Huan said nothing. He couldn't. The weight of those words crushed whatever strength he had left to hold himself together. Then Jinwoo spoke again. Did you ever miss us? That question. It broke him. Tears filled Il Huan's eyes as everything he had buried for years came rushing out. He placed a hand on his head, struggling to contain the emotions, but it was pointless. I did. His voice trembled. I missed you every single day. He had watched them from afar, protected them, stayed hidden. That had been enough. Or at least, that's what he had told himself. But it wasn't. It never was. In that moment, he stepped forward and pulled Jinwoo into an embrace. Tight. Real. His arms wrapped around his son, feeling the strength Jinwoo had gained, the growth, the distance, the years lost between them. You've grown so much. Jinwoo stood there, frozen for a second, then slowly returned the embrace. Tears continued to fall as he tried to make sense of everything. The pain, the separation, the reunion. For the first time in a long while, they were no longer just a hunter and a shadow. They were father and son again. He needed to know whether the rulers had controlled his father, whether they had used him and then discarded him. But Il Huan made it clear, they had not forced him. They had only given him a choice. And from the very beginning, his choice had been unwavering, to protect his son, Jinwoo, no matter the cost. Il Huan held no regrets. He believed fully that he had walked the path he was meant to follow. But his body had already reached its limit. The immense energy he had used in his battle against the monarchs was far more than he could continue to endure. Slowly, his form began to break apart. Jinwoo longed for more time, just a few more moments to speak, but watching this was agonizing. Tears streamed down Il Huan's face, filled with regret for not being the father he wished he could have been. His battle-worn body could no longer hold together. In an instant, Illinois Huan's entire form turned to ash and scattered. Jinwoo reached out, trying to hold on to him, but there was nothing left. A deep, unbearable pain exploded within him. His grief shattered all restraint, and a powerful roar of anguish tore from his chest, echoing across the sky. It was so intense that even the heavens seemed to respond. Rain poured down in torrents, as if the world itself was mourning alongside him. From her window, he watched the heavy rainfall. She had no idea what had happened, nor did she know Huan's fate, but she could feel that something significant had changed. The air itself felt different. Nearby, Gina sat quietly, sensing the same shift. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. He turned to Gina, realizing that they, too, had to move forward. The feeling was unavoidable. Something had ended, and it was time to take the next step. Across the world, the atmosphere trembled with Jin Wu's mana, vibrating with overwhelming intensity. His voice, filled with rage and sorrow, spread across the land, a message directed at the monarchs who had targeted Earth. His vow was clear. He would make them pay for everything they had done. His mana-infused voice traveled far and wide, shaking the very foundations of the world. The fury of the Shadow Monarch could not be ignored. The monarchs had no choice but to hear it. The day Jinwoo's cry echoed across the world was the day the war truly began. Meanwhile, cities rang with celebration. People flooded the streets, cheering in relief and joy. Even news anchors reporting live couldn't hide their excitement as they joined in. Reports poured in from everywhere. Hunter Thomas Andre was no more. Many were left in life-threatening condition, with ambulances already rushing the injured to nearby hospitals. The monstrous creatures that had slaughtered countless citizens had suddenly stopped moving, their bodies reduced to nothing but ash. Their terrifying presence was gone, leaving behind only traces of the destruction they had caused. After the battle, a brief moment of light banter broke the tension between Choi Jong-in and Beck. Jong-in remarked that Beck had seemed tense earlier, asking if he had managed to calm down. Beck, still shaken, fired back, telling Jong-in to wipe the cold sweat from his own forehead before saying anything. Jong-in, keeping his usual calm demeanor, replied that he had a mind-calming pill if Beck needed one, though he added that Beck's heart had probably settled by now. That short exchange signaled a return to normalcy, as relief slowly began to take hold after the chaos. Meanwhile, Wu Jinchul sat in the association's office, his eyes fixed on the television. Around him, his subordinates celebrated, hugging one another and cheering in victory. But Jinchul remained silent. His thoughts drifted back to Jinwoo's earlier vow, the promise to personally kill the demonic beast responsible for Chairman Go Gunhee's death. He realized that the monster they had just defeated was the very one Jin Wu had sworn to destroy. It had been the White Walker, the terrifying creature behind so much devastation. A wave of emotion rose in Jinchul's chest. He felt deep gratitude toward Sung Jinwoo. The battle had been brutal, but now it seemed the nightmare had finally ended. Quietly, he thanked Jinwoo for keeping his promise. At the same time, the Hunter Bureau released an official statement confirming that the monsters that had appeared in the city were previously unidentified demonic beasts. The damage they caused was enormous, leaving large parts of the city in ruins. Yet the relief and celebration didn't last long. Beneath the victory lingered a heavy sense of dread. The true calamity, far worse than what they had just endured, was still approaching. In just a few days, an even more devastating event would shake the world to its core. Hunters from across the globe gathered before a colossal gate. Among them stood Lu Jigang, one of the strongest hunters present, staring in awe at its immense size. The gate towered above everything, larger than anything he had ever witnessed. He had heard stories before, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. A chilling thought crossed his mind. No matter how many hunters gathered there, the massive gate could swallow them all whole and erase them without a trace. The air was thick with tension, alive with the anticipation of tens of thousands of hunters gathered beneath the gate. Every breath felt suspended, as all waited for the inevitable dungeon break. Among them, Thomas Andre stood focused, his eyes fixed on the sky. He knew the moment was close. It wouldn't be long now. Nearby, Wu Jinchul watched the scene with growing unease. Never before had so many hunters from across the world assembled in one place. His thoughts drifted uneasily as he wondered how many of them would survive what was coming. The stakes were overwhelming, and the danger ahead was unlike anything they had ever faced. Most of the hunters kept their attention on two things: the massive gate looming above and Jin Wu standing at the front. Jin Wu stood alone at the forefront, his gaze unwavering as it locked onto the gate. Beside him, Cha Heian watched quietly. She had never seen him like this before. His expression was serious, but beneath that calm surface was something else entirely. His heart wasn't pounding from fear. It was excitement. The gate was about to open, and the moment he had been preparing for had finally arrived. As the gate began to crack open, a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Hunters could sense it. Something massive was waiting on the other side. Beyond the gate, an army. The tension snapped as hunters shouted orders to one another. Everyone rushed into position, preparing for the incoming wave of beasts. Jinwoo's eyes widened slightly as he noticed something crucial. The black barrier that had separated the gate from the world suddenly vanished. And with it, everything inside was released. A swarm of magic beasts poured into the sky, their numbers overwhelming. There were more than 100,000, their sheer presence casting a massive shadow over everything below. The hunters froze. Shock and disbelief spread across their faces. Gasps and cries of despair echoed through the crowd as the creatures slowly descended, as though even gravity had shifted under their weight. Still, the hunters tried to rally. Commands rang out, urging everyone to attack and prepare for battle. But before anyone could act, Jinwoo's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" The single word thundered across the battlefield, carried by an immense surge of mana. Its force reached every hunter present. Even those who didn't understand the language felt its authority. It stopped them all. Instantly, confusion rippled through the crowd. Some questioned the command, others hesitated, unsure of what was happening. Wu Jinchul wiped the sweat from his brow, completely bewildered. He couldn't understand why Jin Wu, in the face of such overwhelming danger, would order them to stop attacking. The tension in the air became almost unbearable. Choi Jong-in felt the same uncertainty. His thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of it. How were they supposed to face such an enormous army of demonic beasts without striking while the enemy was still exposed in midair? From the massive horde, a single creature stepped forward, separating itself from the rest. Jinwoo moved ahead to meet it. For a brief moment, the two stood facing each other. Then, unexpectedly, the creature knelt. Behind it, hundreds of thousands of soldiers followed, bowing in perfect unison before the Shadow Monarch. The sheer sound of that many beings dropping to their knees echoed across the battlefield like thunder. Silence followed. After a moment, the leading creature put out its head and spoke. It introduced itself as Grand Marshal Bellion, the commander of the Shadow Army. Together with his forces, he offered a respectful greeting to their liege, Jin Wu. Wu Jinchul stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. The sight of such terrifying creatures bowing before a human defied everything he knew. His mind struggled to process the reality in front of him. Not far away, Thomas Andre watched in stunned silence. Beside him, Leonard Neerman's eyes were wide with disbelief. Neither of them could fully grasp what was happening. Jinwoo, however, remained deep in thought. As he looked over the Shadow Army, he began to understand the true extent of its power. Among the countless soldiers, 3 dragons stood out, each one possessing enough strength to threaten all of humanity on its own. This was the true might of the Shadow Army, the ultimate force left behind by the previous Shadow Monarch, Ashborn. A cold, determined glint appeared in Jinwoo's eyes. This was only the beginning. The real war had yet to start. A few days later, at the Korean Hunter Association, chaos filled the Emergency Measures Committee room. The foreign press demanded immediate explanations for what had happened. The American Hunters Bureau pressed for Jinwoo's location, while the city's disaster headquarters questioned whether it was safe to allow evacuated civilians to return. Media outlets, including the Jimmy Show from the Hunters Channel, pushed aggressively for an exclusive interview with Jinwoo. Wu Jinchul, visibly overwhelmed, struggled to manage the flood of inquiries. Frustrated, he dismissed the media's demands, sarcastically remarking that they were free to track down Jinwoo themselves if they could. The committee member added that perhaps the media could try to track Jinwoo down themselves, if they were even capable of getting him to appear on their show. Another member, still confused by everything, pointed out how Jinwoo's summons had suddenly emerged from the colossal gate. Wu Jinshul, slightly irritated, snapped back, asking if he would have preferred demonic beasts pouring out instead. The man quickly backed down, stumbling over an apology. Still visibly frustrated, Jinshul pointed out that instead of handling endless interview requests, they could have been dealing with something far worse: calls from the families of fallen hunters. His thoughts drifted. The idea that hundreds of thousands of demonic beasts had come through the colossal gate only to be absorbed into Jinwoo's shadow army was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. Even with the confusion surrounding Jinwoo's sudden disappearance, Jinshul tried to steady the room. This wasn't the first time Sung Jinwoo had vanished, and they would have to grow accustomed to his unpredictability. As the Hunters Association, they had a responsibility. They needed to understand the weight Jinwoo carried, to empathize with the burdens he faced. If they couldn't do that, then who could? The committee member, now humbled, apologized once again for his earlier remarks. Jinshul, staring out the window, quietly wondered what Jinwoo might be doing at that very moment. Far away, in a vast and deserted region of Japan, Sung Jinwoo stood alone. The land stretched endlessly, isolated from prying eyes, the perfect place to test his control over the Shadow Army. He positioned himself at a distance, having divided his forces into two groups for a mock battle. At a single mental command, both sides surged forward, their footsteps striking the ground in perfect synchronization. Beside him, Grand Marshal Bellion observed the clash carefully. Jinwoo turned to him and asked for his thoughts on this method. Bellion, a seasoned warrior, admitted that he had never considered splitting his forces for a mock battle like this. He found the idea surprisingly effective and impressive. Jinwoo simply replied that since his soldiers could not truly die, it made for the perfect training exercise. As the battle intensified, Baru, who had remained unusually quiet, stepped forward. With respect, he asked Jinwoo to test his qualifications for the position of Grand Marshal. He wanted to challenge Bellion. Jinwoo glanced between the two commanders, considering the request. After a brief pause, he gave his approval. This would be a battle between leaders, a true test of strength and command. Without hesitation, the two marshals stepped forward to begin their fight. They stood face to face, their auras colliding in a powerful clash. From opposite ends of the battlefield, Baru extended his razor-sharp claws and let out a piercing screech, while Bellion calmly drew his massive sword from his waist. Jinwoo's eyes were drawn to the weapon. It was far larger than Igris's. He quickly noted the difference in fighting styles. Where Igris relied on speed and precision, Bellion clearly embodied raw power, his strength amplified by the sheer size and weight of his blade. That realization gave Baru a potential advantage in speed. At Jinwoo's command, Baru moved instantly. He shot forward with incredible velocity, closing the distance in a flash. Bellion, however, remained calm. With a single motion, he swung his sword, unleashing overwhelming force. The blade became a blur, each strike generating violent waves of mana that tore through the air and ripped apart the ground around Baru. Even with his agility, Baru struggled to keep up. He barely managed to defend against the relentless barrage. But Baru wasn't done. With sharp reflexes, he deflected Bellion's sword for a split second and lunged forward like a bolt of lightning. Bellion reacted just as quickly. Pulling back his sword, he gathered a tremendous amount of mana into a single strike, then brought it down with devastating force. The impact slammed Baru into the ground like a falling meteor. From a distance, Jinwoo watched closely. Bellion had countered with incredible speed. His reflexes were even sharper than expected. Every swing carried enough power to shatter the earth beneath them. It was clear why Bellion held the title of Grand Marshal. But Jinwoo knew the fight wasn't over yet. Baru's tenacity was not something to underestimate. Even as Bellion stood firm, Baru rose again, slashing wildly with his claws in a desperate counterattack. He lunged forward, attempting to bite into Bellion's shoulder. But Bellion stopped him instantly. With one hand, he seized Baru by the neck, completely immobilizing him. The strength of his grip was overwhelming. With ease, he slammed Baru back into the ground. The outcome was clear. Bellion stood victorious, while Baru lay sprawled and defeated. Still, Baru struggled. His body weakened. but his spirit remained unbroken. He tried to speak, his voice filled with determination. Jinwoo looked down at him, seeing that fierce obsession. Even in defeat, Baru insisted he could continue fighting. Jinwoo asked him why he was so determined to become the Grand Marshal. Baru answered, his tone filled with emotion. His only wish was to stand by his liege's side. Jinwoo paused for a moment before responding. Belian would stand at his right, and Baru would stand at his left. Baru's eyes widened in shock at those words, but before he could say anything more, another presence stepped forward. Igris, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, approached and requested a chance to compete for a position as well. Before he could finish, Jinwoo cut him off, as if he had already expected this. Instead, Jinwoo assigned him a different role. Igris would guard his back. Jinwoo's attention then shifted toward Tusk and the dragons. After a brief exchange between Tusk and them, the dragons seemed to fall into a deep discussion. Soon, the largest among them stepped forward toward Tusk. Jinwoo watched with curiosity, wondering what they were planning. Sensing something about to happen, the surrounding soldiers quickly moved away from the group. Suddenly, the massive dragon unleashed a burst of fire into the sky. Flames roared upward with immense power, lighting the air with a blazing glow. Tusk smirked. Not to be outdone, he stepped forward, and from his mouth erupted a colossal pillar of fire, far greater in scale. The blaze illuminated the entire night sky, drawing loud cheers from the high orcs, while the dragon lowered its head in defeat. It was obvious now, they had been competing to see whose flames were stronger. But Jinwoo noticed something else. Tusk subtly slipped the sphere of avarice back into his clothing, only to freeze when he realized Jinwoo had seen him. Jinwoo couldn't help but think that using the artifact was clearly cheating. As he continued observing, something unusual caught his eye. Ant soldiers were moving back and forth, carrying lumber and stones. Jinwoo turned to Belian, who explained that the ants were building a small resting place for him, somewhere he could stay comfortably during their time there. Jinwoo immediately understood. That had to be Baru's doing. Belian then noticed that Jinwoo hadn't recalled his soldiers back into the shadows and asked him why. Jinwoo answered simply, he wanted to give them time to rest. After being trapped in the dimensional rift for so long, they deserved a moment to breathe. After a brief pause, Jinwoo asked Belian something more personal. Did he feel any sadness about no longer being able to meet Ashborn, the previous Shadow Monarch? Belian's expression shifted slightly as memories resurfaced. He spoke of the time he stood beside Ashborn, even when the rulers had turned against him. From the moment Ashborn gained the power of death, Belian had declared himself his first soldier, and he had never once doubted his leader. Not through war, not through betrayal, not even at the end. Curious, Jinwoo asked him to continue. Belian warned that the story would be long, but began anyway. He spoke of his origin. He had once been part of a great friend tree, a massive entity so vast that its branches stretched across the entire sky. From those branches, all soldiers were born like fruits. The revelation surprised Jinwoo, and as the night grew deeper, he listened in silence. Belian continued his tale, an epic recounting of the Shadow Monarch's journey and the countless years he had spent fighting at Ashborn's side. Back at home, Jinwoo stood in the kitchen, quietly preparing a meal for his family. As his hands moved through the motions, his mind was elsewhere, focused on the danger that loomed ahead. He knew what was coming. The 8 armies could arrive at any moment. A war was inevitable, and he couldn't promise that everyone would survive or that the world itself would remain the same. Through Ashborn's memories, he had witnessed the terrifying power of the Dragon King. The King of Dragons and his army of destruction had reduced everything in their path to ruins and ash. And now, those same forces were coming to Earth. Jinwoo understood that people needed to be warned. They had to prepare for what was coming. As he finished cooking, his mother, Kyung-hee, watched him closely. She sensed something was off. Gently, she asked if something was wrong, mentioning how Jinwoo's father used to cook for her whenever he was about to face something dangerous. She smiled faintly and said Jinwoo had taken after him in that way. Jinwoo brushed it off, telling her it wasn't like that. Just then, the doorbell rang. Jinwoo paused and said someone was at the door, offering to get it. His sister, Jaina, looked puzzled. She hadn't heard anything. When Jinwoo opened the door, he found Myung-han and his associates standing outside in the light snowfall. Myung-han apologized for arriving unannounced, explaining that he needed to speak with him. The two stepped outside into the cold evening. After a moment, Myung-han began to speak. He reflected on how, at first, he had believed waking from the eternal slumber made him special, but he had come to realize that such miracles didn't happen without reason, especially since the only others who had awakened were himself and Jinwoo's mother. He had a suspicion. It had something to do with Jinwoo. Jinwoo confirmed it without hesitation. He admitted that he had intervened and added that he trusted Myung-han. If Myung-han had been the kind of person who would exploit others to achieve his goals, Jinwoo would never have taken that risk. Myung-han understood. It was because he hadn't tried to take advantage of Jinwoo. Overcome with gratitude, Myung-han asked how he could ever repay such a debt. He was willing to return even a fraction of the favor. But Jinwoo shook his head. He didn't want anything. There was only one thing he asked. If anything were to happen to him, Myung-han should take care of his mother and his sister. The simplicity of the request left Myung-han stunned. He asked if that alone would truly be enough. Jinwoo gave a quiet, firm answer. It was more than enough. After a brief pause, Myung-han nodded and made his promise. Myung-han accepted the request without hesitation, promising that he would watch over Jinwoo's family. At Beijing International Airport, the largest and busiest in China, an enormous crowd had gathered. Every available space was filled, making movement nearly impossible. The air buzzed with excitement as Chinese hunters returned after assisting South Korea. Among them was Liu Jigang, a renowned hunter whose presence immediately drew the attention of the media. Reporters rushed toward him, cameras flashing as they tried to capture even a glimpse. They praised the hunters for their bravery in aiding South Korea during its crisis. One reporter managed to get close enough to ask Liu a question, mentioning that while many admired his courage, some questioned why China should help South Korea at all. Liu Jigang didn't hesitate. He dismissed the idea outright, calling it nonsense. His frustration was clear as he pointed out the obvious. South Korea lay directly below China, and the threat posed by the colossal gate affected both nations. He made it clear that he hadn't acted out of generosity, but out of necessity. Even he wasn't confident he could have stopped the disaster if Sung Jinwoo had failed. Before he could finish speaking, something caught his attention. His gaze shifted beyond the airport. The reporter and the surrounding crowd followed his line of sight, and what they saw left them speechless. A vast, dark shadow was slowly spreading across the sky above Beijing. Even Liu, known for his composure, let out a quiet gasp. The growing darkness carried an ominous presence, signaling that something immense was approaching the city. News of the colossal gates spread rapidly across the world. Jinwoo sat across from Wu Jinchul, who showed him several viral videos. The footage captured scenes from China, where one of the massive gates had appeared. But it wasn't just China. Jinchul explained that 8 colossal gates had manifested across the globe, almost simultaneously. He asked if they were connected to Jinwoo's shadow army. Jinwoo immediately shook his head. These gates weren't his doing. Individuals who had endured a brutal selection process, chosen for a war far beyond human comprehension. This wasn't just a conflict between humans and monsters. It was something much greater. A war between the monarchs and the rulers, 2 forces of unimaginable power clashing against one another, with humanity caught helplessly in between. Jinchul's thoughts turned to Jinwoo. One man, standing against that overwhelming power. The weight of it all pressed heavily on him. Questions flooded his mind, but one stood above the rest. How could they possibly support Jinwoo in a battle so far beyond their limits? Jinwoo, however, had already anticipated this moment. He understood exactly what needed to be done. Without hesitation, he made a single, clear request. The leaders of the world must gather. The Korean Hunters Association immediately reached out to representatives across the globe, calling for an urgent meeting. News of the assembly spread quickly, and soon, leaders from 152 nations confirmed their attendance. As Wu Jinchul reviewed the list, he glanced toward his assistant, who informed him that no additional countries had responded beyond those already confirmed. The assistant hesitated, curiosity getting the better of him. He asked what Jinwoo had told Jinchul earlier that morning. Jinchul's face, still pale from the experience, revealed how deeply he had been affected, something those around him had never seen before. Realizing he might have overstepped, the assistant quickly apologized. But Jinchul dismissed it. His mind was elsewhere, still trapped in the memory of that terrifying vision. He remembered it vividly. An endless darkness, and from within it, an immense army of dragons emerging. At their head, a single, colossal dragon. The creature's presence was overwhelming. Wu Jinchul could feel an oppressive force radiating from it, so immense it seemed capable of destroying entire lands with a single breath. The memory alone left him shaken, and a quiet question lingered in his mind. How could Jinwoo possibly stand against something like that? With urgency, Jinchul contacted Jinwoo, informing him that all the representatives had gathered as requested. Jinwoo's response came instantly. He emerged from the shadows, already there. Jinchul gave a faint, almost amused smile. Asking for Jinwoo's location had been pointless. As they stood together, Jinchul couldn't ignore what was about to unfold. Once the world leaders learned the truth, chaos was inevitable. Some nations wouldn't be able to handle it. Panic, unrest, it was bound to follow. But Jinwoo didn't waver. He knew that today, the truth would be revealed. Inside the conference hall, David Brennan sat silently, observing the crowd. Leaders from across the globe had gathered, presidents, prime ministers, influential guild masters, and even the chairman of the Hunters Association. The atmosphere was heavy. Everyone could feel it. An unspoken anxiety hung in the air, as if the weight of an approaching crisis pressed down on them all. A small part of David hoped that Sung Jinwoo might offer reassurance, perhaps claim that the gates were no more dangerous than before. But a darker possibility lingered in his mind. What if the truth was far worse? All eyes turned toward the podium. Jinwoo stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice carried a chilling intensity that immediately silenced the room. He warned them that severe trials were approaching, words heavy enough to send a shock through everyone present. Then, with a simple gesture, he commanded even greater attention. In an instant, dozens of gates appeared behind him. They materialized simultaneously, glowing with an ominous energy. Gates had always been known as portals to dangerous dimensions, but now, before their eyes, Jinwoo had summoned them at will, revealing the true extent of the Shadow Monarch's power. The impact was immediate. Representatives, reporters, and members of the Korean Hunters Association stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Whispers spread rapidly through the room as they struggled to process what they were seeing. Then Jinwoo spoke again. He explained that their enemies possessed the same ability. They, too, could open gates, anywhere, at any time, just as he had done. The only reason the enemy had not yet unleashed their full power was because of the sheer size of the army they commanded. One of the representatives, visibly shaken, voiced a fearful suspicion. He wondered aloud if Jinwoo might somehow be connected to the forces beyond the gates. His doubt extended to the powerful soldiers Jinwoo had once summoned, questioning whether they could one day be turned against humanity. Jinwoo met his gaze in silence. Almost immediately, regret washed over the man. He realized he had gone too far, questioning someone who had already sacrificed so much. Sensing the tension, David Brennan stepped in to redirect the discussion, asking what humanity should do next. Jinwoo's answer was clear and chilling. Humanity must stay as far away from the gates as possible. His words carried urgency. The scale of the approaching enemy would surpass anything the world had ever faced. This wasn't a threat they could confront directly. Not yet. A wave of fear rippled through the room. Leaders and representatives quickly began discussing emergency strategies, realizing the devastation that could follow if they failed to act. Plans formed rapidly: evacuations, restricted zones, anything to keep civilians far from the gates. Far away, in a realm shrouded in darkness, the Dragon King listened. News from Earth had reached him. The Shadow Monarch had chosen to oppose them. For a moment, his piercing gaze sharpened, but he remained calm, carefully considering this development. There was no hesitation in his resolve. If the Shadow Monarch had become an enemy, then he would deal with him personally. He issued his command. The monarchs on Earth were to remain still, for now. There was no need to waste forces unnecessarily. Then, turning toward the vast army hidden in the shadows, the Dragon King spoke once more. My soldiers, prepare for battle. At his command, dozens of ancient dragons began to stir. Their massive forms shifted within the darkness, eyes glowing with fierce intensity. A thunderous roar echoed through the void, a signal that the coming war would soon shake the entire world.